"Ma'am, the client explicitly requested that you be banned from the premises." The voice of my restaurant manager trembled over the phone. I took a calm sip of my morning espresso and asked who the client was. "Mrs. Victoria Vance," she whispered, "my mother-in-law." I almost laughed out loud. Victoria had booked the entire platinum floor at the Obsidian for her 60th birthday party. She wanted a night of pure luxury surrounded by New York's elite without her embarrassing, unemployed daughter-in-law ruining the aesthetic. She wanted to pretend I didn't exist. The only problem was that Victoria didn't know I owned the Obsidian. She didn't know I owned the catering company she hired. She didn't know I owned the building she was standing in. She thought she was banning me from a party. In reality, she was walking straight into a trap I designed just for her. Before we watch Victoria's world crumble, let me know in the comments if you have ever been excluded by family members who thought they were better than you. Hit like and subscribe if you are ready to see a toxic family get exactly what they deserve. 7 hours before the party, the morning sun was just hitting the floor-to-ceiling windows of our Tribeca penthouse. My husband Brad stood in front of the mirror admiring his reflection. He was wearing a navy blue Zegna suit that cost $5,000. He adjusted the silk tie with the confidence of a man who believed he was the king of his castle. "You look sharp," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "Big meeting today." Brad didn't even turn around. "Huge meeting, Chloe. A potential client in New Jersey. I have to drive out there and seal the deal. Probably won't be back until late. Don't wait up for me." I watched him spray on the Tom Ford cologne I had bought him for Christmas. He lied so easily, his voice didn't waver. His hands didn't shake. He was a natural. "That suit fits you perfectly," I added, testing the waters. "Did you buy that recently?" Brad scoffed, finally glancing at me through the mirror. "This number Mom sent this over last week. She said a VP of operations needs to dress the part. Thank God someone in this family understands the importance of image." I kept my face completely blank, a mask of indifference. That was a lie. I knew it was a lie because I was the one who bought the suit. I had purchased it 3 weeks ago using a shell company credit card, so the statement would appear under a generic corporate name. I had the tailor send it to his office with a note signed from his mother. I had been subsidizing his entire lifestyle for 2 years, feeding his ego while he fed me insults. "It is nice of her," I said, my voice steady. Brad turned to me, his eyes scanning my pajamas with disdain. "You know, Chloe, you should really try to put more effort in. Mom mentioned yesterday that you look tired. It is embarrassing when my wife looks like she just rolled out of bed while I am out there conquering the world. Maybe if you had a real corporate job, you would understand." I didn't blink. I didn't defend myself. This was the dynamic he loved. He was the provider, the powerful executive. I was the struggling freelancer, the burden. He had no idea that while he was playing VP at a company his mother got him into, I was running a hospitality empire that generated more revenue in a week than he would make in a lifetime. "I will try harder, Brad," I said. "Good," he replied, checking his watch. "I gotta run. New Jersey traffic is a nightmare." As he reached for his briefcase, his left hand rested on the marble counter. His Apple Watch was facing me. Suddenly, the screen lit up with a notification. The buzz was soft, but in the silence of the kitchen it sounded like a gunshot. Brad was busy grabbing his keys so he didn't look down. But I did. The message was from a contact saved as Mom. The text was clear, bright, and undeniable. The message read, "I secured the VIP table. Make sure you pick up Tiffany. And for God's sake, make sure Chloe thinks you are in New Jersey. Do not let her ruin tonight." The screen went black after 5 seconds. Those 5 seconds were all I needed. My heart didn't race. I didn't scream. I didn't throw my coffee cup at him. Instead, a cold wave of clarity washed over me. This wasn't just a party. This was a setup. Tiffany was his ex-girlfriend, the daughter of a real estate tycoon, the woman his mother had always wanted him to marry. They were planning to parade her around tonight while I sat at home believing my husband was working hard for our future. Brad kissed me on the cheek. It felt like a brand of betrayal. "See you later, babe. Try to do something productive today, okay? Maybe clean the apartment." I watched him walk out the door. I heard the elevator ding. I waited until the heavy silence filled the room again. Productive. He wanted me to be productive. I walked over to the window and watched him get into the Uber waiting downstairs. I picked up my phone and dialed my assistant. "Sarah," I said. "Yes, ma'am. Keep the reservation for the Vance party tonight. Don't cancel it." There was a pause on the line. "But ma'am, they banned you. The note says strict security." "I know," I said, staring at the empty spot where Brad had just been standing. "Let them have their party. Let them order the most expensive champagne. Let them think they have won. But I need you to do something for me. Anything, ma'am. Set up a table for one in the shadow box, the one-way glass room overlooking the main dining hall, and link the security camera feed to my iPad. I want to see everything." I hung up the phone. Brad wanted a productive wife. Victoria wanted a classy party. I decided to give them both exactly what they wanted. I went to my closet, pushing aside the simple clothes I wore to play the part of the dutiful wife. I reached into the back where I kept the life they didn't know about. I pulled out a black Alexander McQueen dress and a pair of diamond earrings I bought after closing my last merger. They thought they were the hunters mocking the weak prey. They had no idea they had just walked into the lion's den, and tonight the lion was hungry. 30 minutes after Brad left for his fake business trip, I walked into the second bedroom of our penthouse. To my husband, this room was a waste of space, a home office for a woman who didn't have a real job. He thought I spent my days here trying to sell amateur paintings on Etsy or browsing Pinterest for home decor ideas. He never questioned why I kept the door locked. He never asked why the internet bill was so high. He simply didn't care enough to look closely. I placed my thumb on the biometric scanner hidden inside the brass doorknob. The lock clicked open with a satisfying mechanical thud. I stepped inside and the air instantly felt different. It was cooler here, conditioned to protect the server rack humming softly in the corner. I sat down at my desk, a sleek slab of black marble that cost more than Brad's car, and tapped the spacebar on my keyboard. 3 32-inch monitors roared to life. This was the nerve center of Aura Hospitality Group. On the left screen, real estate trends in Dubai and Tokyo scrolled in real time. On the right screen, live revenue reports from my boutique hotels in Aspen and Miami populated a spreadsheet. In the center was my email flooding with requests for approval from general managers who knew me only as the chairman. I wasn't just a freelancer. I was the majority shareholder and CEO of a holding company that owned 12 of the most exclusive venues on the East Coast. Brad thought I was unemployed because I didn't leave the house at 8 in the morning. He didn't understand that people at my level didn't commute. We commanded. My private line rang. It was a specific ringtone, a sharp digital chirp that meant urgent business. I picked up the headset. "Talk to me, Sarah," I said. Sarah was my chief of staff, a woman who could organize a state dinner in under an hour. She rarely sounded rattled, but today her voice was tight with anxiety. "Ma'am, we have a situation at the Obsidian," she said. I tried to handle it delicately, but the booking agent just escalated it to the general manager. "I thought you needed to know immediately." I leaned back in my chair, spinning a gold pen between my fingers. The Obsidian was my flagship restaurant in Midtown, 3 Michelin stars, a 6-month waiting list. It was where Wall Street brokers went to celebrate bonuses and where senators went to hide affairs. "What kind of situation?" I asked. "A health inspector. A fire alarm." "No, ma'am. It is a client. A high-priority booking just came through for the platinum floor tonight. They requested the entire mezzanine level. The contract includes a $40,000 minimum spend on food and beverage, excluding service charges." I frowned. "That sounds like a profitable Tuesday night, Sarah. Why are you calling me about a standard VIP booking?" "Because of the name on the credit card authorization form," Sarah whispered. "The client is Mrs. Victoria Vance." My hand froze. The pen stopped spinning. Victoria. My mother-in-law. A woman who claimed she couldn't help us with a down payment on a house because her assets were tied up in investments. A woman who constantly complained about the price of gas. She was dropping $40,000 on a single dinner. I pulled up the reservation system on my center monitor. There it was, a booking for 12 people. The occasion was listed as Victoria's 60th birthday jubilee. "That is not the worst part," Sarah continued, her voice trembling slightly. "In the special requests section of the digital contract, there is a bolded note from the client. I can read it to you if you want." "Read it," I commanded. "It says strictly confidential. Under no circumstances is Mrs. Chloe Vance to be informed of this event. If she attempts to enter the premises to speak with her husband, Mr. Bradley Vance Security is instructed to remove her immediately. We require a guarantee of a Chloe-free environment for the comfort of our guests." I stared at the screen. The words blurred for a second, then sharpened into crystal clarity. They weren't just excluding me. They were actively paying a premium to ensure I was humiliated if I even tried to show up. They wanted to enjoy the luxury of my restaurant, eat my food, drink my wine, and celebrate their elitism while treating the owner like a stray dog to be kicked out by security. Brad was going to be there. He wasn't in New Jersey. He was going to be sitting at the head of the table at the Obsidian, playing the role of the dutiful son and the successful vice president, likely with his arm around Tiffany. Sarah cleared her throat on the other end of the line. "Ma'am, are you still there?" "I am here," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "I can cancel it right now," Sarah offered quickly. "I can tell them there was a system error. I can tell them a pipe burst in the kitchen. I can have the general manager call Victoria and tell her we don't serve people who make discriminatory requests. Say the word and I will ban her from every property in the Aura portfolio. She won't be able to book a motel room in this city when I am done with her. I considered it. It would be easy. A simple click of a mouse and Victoria's big night would be ruined. She would be standing on the sidewalk in her expensive dress, embarrassed and furious. But that was too small. That was petty. I didn't want to annoy her. I wanted to destroy her. I wanted to expose the rot in my marriage and the hypocrisy of his family in high definition. If I canceled the party, I was just the jealous wife. If I let the party happen, I became the executioner. "Do not cancel the reservation," I said. Sarah paused. "Ma'am, did you hear the part about them banning you?" "I heard it. Process the deposit. Charge the full $40,000 to the card on file immediately. Make sure the transaction clears before they even order an appetizer." "Understood. Is there anything else?" "Yes," I said, my eyes narrowing as I looked at the floor plan of the Obsidian on my screen. "I want you to contact the technical team at the restaurant. Tell them to activate the shadow box." Sarah gasped. "The shadow box." "We haven't used that since the senator's private summit. It was a special feature I had designed into the restaurant's architecture. On the upper level overlooking the main platinum dining floor was a private owner's suite concealed behind a one-way mirror. From the inside, it looked like a floor-to-ceiling window offering a panoramic view of the restaurant below. From the outside, it looked like a decorative black mirrored wall. "Prep the suite," I ordered. "Stock it with my preferred vintage. And Sarah, this is the most important part. I want 4K cameras and high-fidelity microphones rigged at Table 1, where the Vance family will be sitting. I want a live feed streamed directly to the monitor in the shadow box and to my personal iPad." "You want to watch them?" Sarah asked. "No," I corrected her. "I want to record them. I want every insult, every lie, and every financial boast captured in cinema quality. They want a Chloe-free environment, fine. I will give them the illusion of privacy. And while they drink champagne and laugh about how they fooled me, I will be sitting 10 feet above their heads, holding the trigger to their destruction." "Consider it done," Ma'am Sarah said, her professional tone returning. I hung up the phone. On my screen, the reservation status changed from pending to confirmed. I stood up and walked over to the safe behind the painting on the wall. I spun the dial and pulled out the heavy steel door. Inside sat the jewelry I never wore around Brad because it would raise too many questions. I picked up a diamond tennis bracelet and a Patek Philippe watch. Tonight, the freelancer was staying home. The chairman was going out to dinner. At 6:45 in the evening, the black Escalade pulled up to the service entrance of the Obsidian. This was the entrance reserved for delivery trucks, waste management, and the occasional celebrity who wanted to avoid the paparazzi. Tonight, it was the entrance for the owner who needed to remain a ghost. My driver, a former Navy SEAL named Elias, who had been on my payroll for 5 years, opened the door. He didn't say a word. He just handed me my iPad and nodded. I stepped out onto the damp pavement of the alleyway. The air smelled of rain and exhaust, but the moment I pushed through the heavy steel security doors, the atmosphere shifted instantly. The back of the house was a symphony of controlled chaos. The smell of searing Wagyu beef and truffle oil filled the air. Steam rose from giant stock pots. Waiters in crisp white jackets moved with military precision, balancing silver trays high above their heads. Usually a kitchen during dinner service is the loudest place on earth, but the moment I stepped onto the non-slip tiles, the noise level dropped. The sous chef, a large man named Marco, was the first to spot me. He tapped the shoulder of the line cook next to him. The motion rippled down the line. Within 10 seconds, the clanging of pans and the shouting of orders ceased. 40 staff members froze in place. They knew who I was. To Brad, I was the wife who couldn't figure out how to reset the Wi-Fi router. To these people, I was the woman who signed their paychecks and approved the Michelin menu. "Good evening, Madame," Marco said, wiping his hands on his apron and bowing his head slightly. "Keep working, Marco," I said, my voice cutting through the silence. "Do not let the soufflés fall on my account. And Marco, yes, Madame Table 1, the Vance party. Make sure every dish is perfect. I want them to taste the excellence they are about to lose." "Yes, Madame." I walked past the prep stations, my heels clicking on the tile. The general manager, Henri, was waiting for me by the service elevator. Henri was a Frenchman with a nervous disposition but impeccable taste. He looked like he was about to have a heart attack. "Madame Vance," he whispered, pressing the button for the upper level. "I have done exactly as you asked. The shadow box is prepped. The bottle of Romanée Conti is breathing. But I must warn you. Warn me about what Henri the guest list," he said, handing me a leather-bound tablet. "They arrived early. They are already at the bar waiting for their table to be ready. And the people they brought with them, it is not just family, it is a war council." I took the tablet and stepped into the elevator. The doors closed, sealing us in. I looked down at the digital manifest. Henri was right. This wasn't a birthday dinner. This was a strategic alliance meant to erase me from existence. I swiped through the profiles. First was Tiffany Moore. The name alone made my stomach tighten, not from jealousy, but from disgust. Tiffany was the daughter of a real estate mogul in the Hamptons. She was everything Victoria wanted in a daughter-in-law, blonde, vapid, and publicly wealthy. I tapped on her profile. Henri had done his research. Tiffany's father was currently under investigation for insider trading, but the Vance family didn't know that yet. They only saw her old money aesthetic. To them, Tiffany was the prize Brad deserved. To me, she was just a woman wearing a stolen necklace. I swiped again. Marcus King. I paused. So they brought the heavy artillery. Marcus was my brother-in-law, married to Brad's older sister. He was a partner at one of the most aggressive law firms in the city. A brilliant, sharp-tongued man who had clawed his way up from nothing to become a shark in a three-piece suit. Marcus was dangerous. He didn't care about morality. He cared about winning. He was the one who had drafted Brad's prenuptial agreement, which I had refused to sign 5 years ago. He had been looking for a way to get me out of the picture ever since. I studied his photo. He looked confident, smiling that predatory smile that charmed juries and destroyed defendants. Victoria must have brought him to ensure the divorce or whatever ambush they were planning was legally watertight. They needed a lawyer to navigate the messy business of discarding a wife. Marcus was here to serve me papers, or perhaps to intimidate me into silence. I swiped to the next name, Samantha Vance, Brad's sister, Marcus's wife. She was a social climber who spent money faster than Marcus could earn it. She had once asked to borrow $5,000 from me for a handbag emergency and never paid it back. I saw she had pre-ordered the vegan tasting menu. The list went on. 12 people, all of them connected to Brad. All of them people who had smiled at my face at Thanksgiving while whispering behind my back. The elevator chimed. We had reached the mezzanine level. This floor was restricted. No guests allowed. The hallway was lined with black velvet. At the end of the hall stood a single unmarked door. Henri swiped his keycard. The lock beeped green. "After you, madame," he said. I stepped into the shadow box. It was a small, elegant lounge designed for absolute surveillance. The front wall was entirely glass, a one-way mirror looking directly down onto the main dining floor of the Obsidian. From down there, it looked like a chic, black, decorative panel reflecting the chandeliers. From up here, I could see everything. The room was dark, lit only by the glow of 3 large monitors on the side wall. On the low coffee table, a bottle of red wine worth $15,000 sat open next to a single crystal glass. I walked to the glass wall. The view was perfect. Directly below me in the center of the platinum floor was table 1. The round table was set with our finest bone china and gold-rimmed glassware. The centerpiece was a massive arrangement of white orchids, Victoria's favorite flower. And there they were. I watched as the hostess led them from the bar to the table. Victoria was leading the pack wearing a silver sequined dress that was a little too tight for a 60-year-old. She walked with her nose in the air, surveying the restaurant as if she owned it. Brad was right behind her, his hand resting on the small of Tiffany's back. He leaned in and whispered something into her ear, and she threw her head back, laughing a laugh that looked practiced and fake. Marcus brought up the rear, his eyes scanning the room, assessing the exits, assessing the crowd. He looked like a wolf entering a sheep pen. I picked up the glass of wine and took a slow sip. The liquid was rich, complex, and tasted like power. Henri stood by the door waiting for instructions. "Turn on the audio," I said. Henri tapped a panel on the wall. Instantly, the voices from the table below filled the room crisp and clear, captured by the hidden microphones in the floral centerpiece. Unbelievable. Mom Brad's voice came through the speakers. "I can't believe you got this table. Do you know how hard it is to get a reservation here?" Victoria laughed, taking her seat at the head of the table. "Money talks, Bradley. And connections talk louder." I told them who we were and doors opened, unlike your wife who probably couldn't get a reservation at a diner. The table erupted in laughter. I swirled the wine in my glass. "Enjoy the appetizers, Victoria," I whispered to the empty room, because the main course is going to be hard to swallow. The shadow box was designed for 2 things: absolute privacy and absolute control. It was an architectural marvel I had commissioned 5 years ago when I first acquired the Obsidian. Suspended 12 feet above the main dining floor, it was effectively a luxury bunker hidden in plain sight. From the outside, it appeared to be nothing more than a sleek decorative panel of black onyx glass that reflected the glittering chandeliers of the dining room. It blended perfectly into the restaurant's dark, modern aesthetic. No guest ever looked up and wondered who was behind it. They were too busy looking at their food or at each other. But from the inside, the glass was completely transparent. It offered a panoramic, godlike view of every table, every waiter, and every bottle of wine being uncorked below. I sat in the Eames lounge chair, the leather cool against my skin. The room was soundproof, cutting off the ambient noise of the restaurant. It was silent up here, save for the soft hum of the server banks and the clink of my wine glass as I set it down on the marble console. Henri, my general manager, stood by the door like a sentinel. He had dimmed the lights in the box so that my silhouette would be invisible, even if someone stared directly at the glass. "Are the microphones live?" I asked, my eyes fixed on table 1. "Live and recording in high definition," Madame Henri confirmed. "The directional mics are concealed in the floral arrangement. The audio quality is crystal clear." I leaned forward. Below me, the Vance family was settling in. It was a masterclass in arrogance. Victoria took the seat at the head of the table naturally. She gestured for the waiter, snapping her fingers, as if he were a servant in her own home rather than a trained professional at a 3 Michelin star establishment. I watched Brad pull out a chair for Tiffany. He did it with a chivalry I hadn't seen in years. He placed a hand on her shoulder, lingering a moment too long, whispering something that made her giggle. It was a physical betrayal, captured in 4K resolution. I tapped the screen of my iPad, zooming in on the interaction. I saved the clip. That was Exhibit A for the divorce attorney. Then the audio feed kicked in. The speakers in the shadow box crackled to life, bringing their voices into the room as if they were sitting right next to me. "Love the ambiance here," Tiffany was saying, looking around with wide, greedy eyes. "It is so much better than that place Brad took us for Christmas. What was it called, that Italian place, Olive Garden?" Victoria sneered, unfolding her napkin. That was Chloe's choice, of course. The girl has the palate of a peasant. She thinks breadsticks are haute cuisine. I didn't react. I simply noted that the Italian restaurant they were mocking was actually a family-owned trattoria I loved, and the bill for that Christmas dinner was $600, which I had paid because Brad forgot his wallet. Again. "Well, you don't have to worry about peasant food tonight," Marcus said, his voice booming with authority. "This place is the real deal. I heard the owner is some reclusive billionaire who runs the place from Europe. They only accept the top 1% here." I smiled into my wine glass. The reclusive billionaire was currently sitting 12 feet above his head, wearing a dress that cost more than his car. The waiter, a young man named Julien, whom I had personally hired for his discretion, approached the table with the wine list. "Champagne to start." Madame Julien asked, bowing to Victoria. "Only the best," Victoria commanded. "We are celebrating my 60th, and more importantly, we are celebrating freedom. Bring us 2 bottles of the Dom Perignon Rose Gold." I did a mental calculation. That was $6,000 a bottle. Victoria was spending $12,000 of my money before the appetizers even arrived. Julien hesitated for a fraction of a second, his eyes flickering toward the black glass of the shadow box. He knew I was watching. He knew the credit card on file was mine. He was waiting for a sign. I pressed the button on the intercom that connected only to Julien's earpiece. "Serve them, Julien," I said calmly. "Give them whatever they want. Let them run up the bill until the card smokes." Julien gave a barely perceptible nod and walked away. Victoria leaned back, looking satisfied. She surveyed the table, her gaze landing on the empty chair where a daughter-in-law should have been. I must say she announced, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that the microphones picked up perfectly. "The air just feels cleaner in here without her, doesn't it?" Brad chuckled, taking a sip of water. "Mom, come on. Don't mom me, Bradley." Victoria snapped, though she was smiling. "Admit it. You are relieved. I did you a favor. I called the manager myself and made sure they knew to keep the trash off the premises." The word hung in the air of the shadow box. Trash. She literally called security. Tiffany laughed, touching Brad's arm. "It was so boss, Victoria. I can't believe you actually banned her. What if she tries to show up?" "Let her try," Marcus interjected, adjusting his cuffs. "I have already drafted a cease and desist. If she steps foot within 50 feet of this table, we can have her arrested for harassment. It would actually be perfect. A nice arrest record would make the divorce proceedings much smoother. We could argue she is mentally unstable. Brad didn't defend me. He didn't look uncomfortable. He just shrugged. She won't show up," Brad said confidently. "She is probably at home crying into a pint of ice cream. Chloe doesn't have the spine for confrontation. She is soft. She needs me to survive. Soft." I looked down at my hands. They were steady. I looked at the reflection of my eyes in the darkened glass. They weren't soft. They were hard as diamonds. I watched them toast to their cleverness. I watched Victoria raise her imaginary glass to a victory she hadn't earned. They were so sure of themselves. They were so sure that I was the weak link, the financial burden, the social embarrassment. They had no idea that the soft woman they were mocking held the deed to the building. They had no idea that the chair Marcus was sitting on was imported from Italy on my cargo jet. They had no idea that their entire financial existence was a house of cards that I was holding up with one hand. And I was about to let go. I finished my wine and set the glass down with a sharp click. "Henri," I said, standing up. "Yes, madame, is the lighting cue ready? Ready on your command, madame, and the security team, standing by at the main entrance and the kitchen exit." "Good," I said, smoothing the fabric of my dress. I walked toward the door of the shadow box. I didn't look back at the monitors. I didn't need to watch them on a screen anymore. It was time to switch from digital to analog. "I am going down," I said. Henri opened the door for me. "Shall I play the music?" "Madame, no," I said. "Cut the music. I want them to hear the sound of my heels on the floor. I want them to hear silence before the storm." I stepped out into the hallway. The game was over. The execution was about to begin. The walk from the private elevator of the mezzanine level to the main dining floor of the Obsidian was designed to be dramatic. I had worked with the architects to ensure the acoustics were perfect. When you walked down that central staircase, the sound of the restaurant faded slightly, allowing the person descending to command the room's attention without saying a word. I took the first step. The marble was cool beneath the soles of my heels. I moved slowly. I wasn't in a rush. The prey wasn't going anywhere. From my vantage point on the stairs, I had a direct line of sight to table 1. They were oblivious to my approach. They were too drunk on their own arrogance and the $6,000 champagne I was currently paying for. I paused halfway down the staircase, concealed by the shadow of a large pillar, to watch the next act of their play unfold. It was the moment I knew was coming, but seeing it in person was a visceral experience that no camera feed could replicate. Victoria stood up. She tapped her spoon against her crystal flute, the sharp ping silencing the table. She looked radiant in a way that only a woman spending someone else's money could. Attention. Everyone, she announced, her voice carrying over the low hum of the dining room. I have a very special announcement. We all know that my son Bradley has had a difficult few years. He has been burdened by mistakes. He has been held back by a partner who simply did not understand the Vance legacy. I gripped the railing of the staircase. My knuckles turned white, not from sadness, but from the sheer audacity. The Vance legacy was a pile of debts and lawsuits until I bailed them out. But tonight, Victoria continued, gesturing grandly to the woman sitting next to Brad. Tonight, we turn a page. I want to formally introduce you all to the woman who should have been sitting at this table 5 years ago. A woman of breeding, of class, and of impeccable taste, the daughter of the great Charles Moore and the future mother of my grandchildren. Everyone, please raise a glass to Tiffany. The table erupted in applause. Brad beamed, looking at Tiffany with the adoration of a puppy. Tiffany giggled, feigning modesty. She was beautiful in a standard manufactured way, blonde extensions, perfect veneers, and a dress that showed off exactly enough skin to keep Brad distracted. She stood up to acknowledge the applause, doing a little wave like she was winning a beauty pageant. "Thank you, Mrs. Vance." Tiffany said, her voice high and breathy. "I am just so honored to be here with a real family. Brad has told me so much about how stifling his life was before. I just want to bring some light back into it." I watched Brad squeeze her hand. "You already have, babe," he said loud enough for the table to hear. "You have no idea what a relief it is to be with someone who actually fits in my world." It was a nauseating display, but then the light from the crystal chandelier above them caught something around Tiffany's neck. My breath stopped in my throat. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. It was a necklace, a platinum choker featuring a rare 5-carat cushion-cut sapphire surrounded by a halo of conflict-free diamonds. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was a custom piece I had commissioned from a jeweler in Geneva 3 years ago to celebrate the acquisition of my first hotel in London. It was one of a kind. I had designed the setting myself. 6 months ago, that necklace had vanished from my safe. I remembered the day vividly. I was getting ready for a charity gala. I opened the velvet box and found it empty. I had panicked. I tore the bedroom apart. Brad had come in looking concerned. He helped me search. He hugged me while I hyperventilated. It must have been the movers, Chloe, he had said, looking me straight in the eye. "Remember when we had the carpets cleaned? Or maybe you left it at the gym? You are always so scatterbrained lately. You probably lost it and didn't even realize." He had gaslighted me for weeks. He made me file a police report against the cleaning staff. He made me doubt my own memory. He made me feel irresponsible and senile. And now, there it was, resting on the neck of his mistress. I wasn't looking at a betrayal anymore. I was looking at grand larceny. I was looking at a felony. Tiffany reached up and fingered the sapphire, noticing the way the other women at the table were eyeing it. "Oh, this?" she asked, sensing their jealousy. "Isn't it stunning? Brad gave it to me for our 3-month anniversary. He said it has been in his family for generations. He said it belonged to his great-grandmother, who was a countess in France." I almost laughed. A countess. The only thing Brad's great-grandmother was a countess of was a trailer park in Ohio. "Wow!" Samantha, my sister-in-law, gasped. "It must be worth a fortune." "It is priceless," Tiffany cooed. "Brad told me he had to fight to get it out of the vault because he wanted me to know how serious he is. He said he never let Chloe touch it because he knew she wouldn't appreciate the history." I felt a cold, metallic rage settle in my chest. It was a clarifying sensation. Any lingering doubt I had, any tiny shred of mercy I might have been harboring for the man I married, evaporated in that instant. He hadn't just cheated on me. He had stolen my property, watched me cry over it, blamed innocent workers for its disappearance, and then re-gifted it to his lover with a fabricated backstory to impress her. He was not just a cheater, he was a thief, and a bad one at that. I took a step down, then another. The sound of my heels on the marble was louder now, closer. The waiter, Julian, was pouring more wine at their table. He looked up and saw me descending. His eyes widened. He froze with the bottle mid-air. Victoria noticed the waiter's distraction. "What is the matter with you?" she snapped. "Pour the wine. Do I have to teach you how to do your job?" Julian didn't answer. He slowly straightened up, capping the bottle. He took a step back from the table. Victoria frowned. "Excuse me, I gave you an order." Julian looked at her, then looked past her toward the staircase. "I am afraid I cannot serve you anymore," Madame Julienne said softly. Victoria slammed her hand on the table. "This is outrageous. I want to speak to the owner immediately." "You don't have to look far," I said. My voice was calm, projected perfectly from the bottom of the stairs. The conversation at the table died instantly. 12 heads turned in unison. I stepped into the light of the main dining room. I was wearing the black Alexander McQueen dress that fit like a suit of armor. I walked toward them, not with the hesitation of an unwanted guest, but with the stride of a predator closing the distance. Brad dropped his fork. It clattered loudly against his china plate. His face went pale, draining of all color, until he looked like a wax figure. Tiffany blinked, confused. She looked at Brad, then at me. "Who is that?" she whispered. Victoria stood up, her face twisting into a mask of ugly fury. "You!" she hissed. "You have some nerve showing your face here. Did you not get the message? You are banned, Chloe." Banned. I didn't look at Victoria. I didn't look at Marcus, who was already reaching for his phone, presumably to call security, or his legal team. I locked eyes with Tiffany. I walked straight up to her, ignoring the personal space boundary. I stood 6 inches from her chair. I could smell her perfume. It was cheap and floral, trying too hard to be elegant. "Hello, Tiffany," I said. Tiffany looked at me with a mix of defiance and confusion. "Excuse me, do I know you?" "No," I said softly. "But I know that necklace." Brad scrambled to stand up, knocking his chair over. "Chloe, wait," he stammered. "It is not what you think." I ignored him. I kept my eyes on the sapphire. "That is a beautiful piece," I said to Tiffany. "Cushion cut, 5 carats, platinum setting with a hidden clasp on the left side, engraved on the back with the date October 12th, 2019. Tiffany's hand flew to the necklace, covering it protectively. "How do you know that?" "Because," I said, finally tearing my eyes away from the jewels to look at my husband. "That is the date I bought my first hotel. And that necklace was in my bedside safe until Brad stole it 6 months ago." The silence at the table was heavy, suffocating. Victoria laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Oh, please. You buy a sapphire like that? You can't even afford your own car insurance." "Brad told us everything, Chloe. Stop embarrassing yourself. He bought that with his bonus." I smiled. It was the smile of a woman who was about to drop the guillotine. "Is that what he told you?" I asked. "Well, that is interesting, because the police report I filed when it went missing lists the value at $250,000, and possessing stolen property over $1,000 is a felony in the state of New York." I looked at Tiffany, whose face was starting to crumble. "So, Tiffany," I said, "you have 2 choices. You can hand it over to me right now, or you can explain to the officers waiting outside why you are wearing evidence from an active grand larceny investigation." I held out my hand, palm up, waiting. The silence that followed my demand for the necklace was broken not by Tiffany or Brad, but by the sharp sound of a chair scraping against the floor. Marcus King stood up. He was a tall man, over 6'2", with the kind of imposing physical presence that filled a courtroom. He adjusted the lapels of his charcoal gray suit, a custom piece from Savile Row that I knew cost upwards of $4,000. He looked down at me with an expression of bored amusement, as if I were a particularly persistent telemarketer who had interrupted his dinner. Marcus was a partner at King & Sterling, one of the most ruthless corporate law firms in Manhattan. He had built his reputation on destroying unions and burying whistleblowers under mountains of paperwork. He was the family fixer, the man who made problems disappear. And right now, he decided that I was just another problem to be redacted. "You are making a scene." Chloe Marcus said, his voice deep and smooth, carrying the practiced cadence of a Harvard law graduate. "And you are making wild accusations that could easily be construed as slander. If I were you, I would lower my hand and step back before you talk yourself into a lawsuit you cannot afford." I didn't move. I didn't lower my hand. I kept my eyes locked on Tiffany's throat, but I shifted my attention to the man standing next to her. "Is that legal advice, Marcus?" I asked calmly. "Because usually you charge $1,200 an hour for that. Or are you doing this pro bono because you are worried about your brother-in-law going to prison?" Marcus chuckled, shaking his head as he walked around the table to stand between me and Tiffany. He used his body as a shield, blocking my view of the stolen sapphire. "There is no theft here, Chloe," he said, crossing his arms. "You are married to Brad. Under New York state law, assets acquired during the marriage are generally considered marital property unless specified otherwise. Technically, Brad has every right to possess that necklace. If he chooses to let a friend wear it for the evening, that is his prerogative. It is a civil dispute, not a criminal one. The police won't touch it. He was lying. He knew he was lying. Personal jewelry owned by one spouse is not community property, especially when there is a receipt in my name alone. But Marcus wasn't interested in the truth. He was interested in intimidation. He was banking on the fact that I was just a freelance art consultant who didn't understand the penal code. He turned his back to me, dismissing me completely, and looked down at his terrified brother-in-law. "Brad, look at me," Marcus commanded. "Stop shaking. This is exactly why I told you to execute the exit strategy months ago. You let this drag on too long, and now she thinks she has leverage." Brad wiped sweat from his forehead. "She says she filed a police report, Marcus. What if she really did?" "Let her file it," Marcus scoffed. "It goes nowhere. I play golf with the district attorney every Sunday. I will have the file lost before it even hits a detective's desk. That is how the real world works." He reached into his briefcase, which was resting on an empty chair, and pulled out a thick document bound in a blue folder. He tossed it onto the table. It landed with a heavy thud right next to the untouched caviar. "This is what matters," Marcus said, tapping the folder with a manicured finger. "The divorce petition. I finished drafting it this morning. We were going to give it to you after dessert, Chloe. But since you were eager enough to crash the party, we might as well do this now." I looked at the folder. I didn't reach for it. "What is in it?" I asked. "Your reality check," Marcus said, smiling cruelly. "I have structured this to ensure Brad retains full ownership of the apartment, the car, and 90% of the liquid savings. We are filing on grounds of irreconcilable differences, but if you fight us, we will amend it to mental instability. We will drag out the proceedings for years. We will bury you in motions and depositions until you run out of money to pay your lawyer." He paused, looking me up and down with contempt. "And let's be honest, Chloe, you don't have the funds for a war. You barely make rent contributions. I have seen your tax returns. You are a hobbyist. Brad is the breadwinner." I listened to him dissect my life. It was fascinating. He had built an entire legal strategy based on the assumption that I was destitute. He had no idea that the tax returns he saw were for my Decoy Consulting LLC, which I kept solely to maintain my cover. He had never seen the tax returns for Aura Hospitality Group because those were filed under a blind trust in the Cayman Islands. Marcus leaned in closer to Brad, his voice lowering to a conspiratorial tone, though he made sure I could still hear every word. "Here is the lesson, Brad. The law does not protect the poor. It protects the people who can afford to weaponize it. It protects the people who hire men like me. Chloe can scream about justice all she wants, but by the time I am done with her, she will be lucky if she leaves this marriage with a suitcase of old clothes and a bus ticket." Victoria clapped her hands together, delighted. "Oh, Marcus, you are brilliant. That is exactly what she deserves. A bus ticket." Marcus turned back to face me, looking smug. "So, here is the offer, Chloe," he said, checking his Rolex. "You sign the papers tonight. You agree to vacate the apartment within 48 hours. You waive all claims to spousal support. In exchange, Brad will give you a cash settlement of $5,000 to help you get settled in. wherever people like you live. Queens, perhaps. $5,000, I repeated. It is a generous offer, Marcus said. Take it, or I will ruin you. I will make sure you never work in this city again. I will drain your bank account dry in legal fees. I will make your life a living hell. I looked at him. I looked at the arrogance etched into his face. He thought he was the shark in the tank. He thought he was the apex predator. He didn't know that he was standing in my building. He didn't know that 5 minutes ago I had texted my own legal team, a team of 12 attorneys who made King and Sterling look like a strip mall law firm. He also didn't know that under Section 403 of the New York Penal Code, threatening a witness in an active investigation was a Class E felony. And thanks to the microphones in the flower arrangement, I had his entire speech recorded in high fidelity. You really think you can erase me that easily? I asked softly. Marcus laughed. Chloe, you are already erased. You just haven't left the room yet. Now be a good girl. Turn around, walk out that door, and wait for my paralegal to email you the DocuSign link. You are ruining the ambiance. He sat back down, picking up his menu as if I had ceased to exist. I will have the ribeye medium rare, he told the empty space where the waiter used to be, and bring another bottle of that wine. On the corporate card. I watched him for a second longer. He was about to order a steak in a restaurant that I owned, paid for by a company that I owned while threatening to bankrupt me. The irony was so rich, I could taste it. You are right about one thing, Marcus, I said. He didn't look up. What is that? The law does protect the people who can afford it. I reached into my clutch and pulled out my phone. I didn't call the police. Not yet. I called someone far more dangerous for a man like Marcus. I tapped the contact for the chairman of the State Bar Ethics Committee. He was an old friend. We played tennis on Thursdays. I hit send on the audio file I had just recorded. Then I looked at Marcus and smiled. Let's see how much protection you have when you lose your license. Marcus didn't even wait for me to leave the table before he turned his attention back to the menu. His dismissal was a masterclass in psychological warfare. By ignoring me, he was telling the entire room that I was insignificant, a nuisance, not worth the energy of a confrontation. He was betting that his threat of legal ruin had paralyzed me. He was betting that I would retreat to the shadows, terrified and obedient. He was wrong, of course. I didn't retreat. I simply took a half step back into the dim lighting near the service station, crossing my arms. I wasn't leaving. I was waiting for the transaction. Victoria snapped her fingers at Julienne, who was still holding the rejected wine bottle. Waiter, she barked, take that swill away. We are celebrating a new chapter for my son, free of dead weight. We need something that screams royalty. Bring us the Imperial Beluga caviar service, the one with the mother of pearl spoons, and I want a tin for everyone. I watched Julienne hesitate. He looked at me, his eyes wide with panic. The Imperial Beluga was the most expensive item on the menu. We imported it directly from a sustainable farm in the Caspian Sea. It cost $500 per ounce. A tin for everyone meant she was ordering $6,000 worth of fish eggs as an appetizer. I gave Julienne a barely perceptible nod. Do it, I mouthed. Julienne swallowed hard and hurried toward the kitchen. While they waited, the atmosphere at the table shifted from tense to celebratory. They thought they had won. They thought my silence was submission. You handled that beautifully, Marcus, Victoria cooed, reaching over to pat his hand. She is like a stray cat. You have to be firm or she will keep scratching at the door. Brad let out a long breath, loosening his tie. God, that was intense. Did you see her face when you brought up the settlement $5,000? She probably thinks that is a fortune. Tiffany giggled, leaning her head on Brad's shoulder. It is kind of sad, really. She looks so desperate. But babe, are you sure we can afford this place? I mean, the menu doesn't even have prices. Brad straightened his spine, puffing out his chest. The transition from cowed husband to big shot provider was instantaneous. Babe, don't worry about money, he said, his voice loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. I am the vice president of operations. I handle million-dollar contracts every day. This dinner is nothing. Besides, I want to spoil you. You deserve the best, unlike some people who wouldn't know the difference between caviar and cat food. I felt a vibration on my wrist, my Apple Watch. It wasn't a text message. It was a security alert from the Aura Group financial mainframe. I looked down. Transaction attempted, the Obsidian. Amount $12,500. Item Chateau Margaux, 2009. Merchant Aura Hospitality. I looked up. Julianne was returning not just with the caviar, but with the bottle of wine Victoria had demanded earlier, the $12,000 bottle. Usually, for a vintage this rare, we required a credit card authorization before uncorking. It was standard protocol to prevent fraud. Julian held the credit card machine in his hand, looking apologetic. Sir Julian said to Brad, "For the vintage collection, house policy requires an initial swipe for authorization." Brad didn't flinch. He laughed. "Of course. House policy. Very professional." He reached into his jacket pocket. I knew exactly what he was reaching for. For years, Brad had carried a heavy black metal credit card. He told his friends it was an exclusive invitation-only card from American Express. He told his mother it was a perk of his high-ranking executive position. The truth was, it was a supplementary card issued to a shell company I owned called Vesta Holdings. I had given it to him 3 years ago for emergencies. I told him it had a limit of $500 and was only for car repairs or medical urgencies. I told him I managed the account for him because he was bad with paperwork. In reality, because it was linked to my primary business account, it had no limit. And Brad, despite his claims of being a financial wizard, had clearly figured that out. He pulled the card out with a flourish. The black metal caught the light of the chandelier. "Put it all on," this Brad said, tossing the card onto the silver tray. "And keep the tab open. We are just getting started." Julianne inserted the chip. I watched the machine. I watched my husband. He was grinning at Tiffany, looking like the king of the world. He was buying his mistress $12,000 wine using a card paid for by the wife he was divorcing. He wasn't just stealing from me. He was using my own success to fund my humiliation. My watch buzzed again. Transaction approved. The anger that had been simmering in my gut turned into something colder, harder. It turned into calculation. Julian popped the cork. The sound echoed like the gunshot. He poured a splash into Brad's glass for tasting. Brad swirled it, sniffed it, and took a sip, mimicking the motions of a connoisseur he had seen in movies. "Exquisite," Brad declared. "Notes of oak and berries. Pour for the lady." He had no idea what he was drinking. He was drinking my sweat, my long nights, my negotiations, my empire. Then came the caviar. Julianne placed the silver tins on crushed ice in front of each guest. Victoria scooped a massive mound of the black pearls onto a mother-of-pearl spoon. That single bite cost more than the weekly grocery budget she used to criticize me for. She shoved it into her mouth, closing her eyes in exaggerated ecstasy. "Oh, Bradley," she moaned, "this is divine. You really have outdone yourself. This is how the Vances are meant to live. Eat up everyone," Brad said, raising his glass. "To the future, to upgrading." "To upgrading," they chorused, clinking their glasses. I stood there in the shadows watching them consume. They were vultures picking at a carcass, unaware that the carcass was still alive and watching them. Every swallow of wine was a theft. Every spoonful of caviar was a crime. I pulled out my phone and opened the banking app for Vesta Holdings. I saw the pending charge, $12,500. I could have frozen the card right then. I could have declined the transaction and watched the waiter come back to tell Brad his card was dead. It would have been a moment of embarrassment, but embarrassment wasn't enough. Not anymore. I needed criminal liability. I needed grand larceny. I needed the numbers to be so high that no lawyer, not even Marcus, could plea bargain it down to a misdemeanor. In New York State, grand larceny in the second degree applies to theft of property exceeding $50,000. The current tab was at roughly $18,000. I needed them to spend more. I typed a quick message to Julian's headset. "Upsell them," I wrote. "Suggest the white truffle risotto. Suggest the Wagyu tomahawk steaks. Suggest the Louis XIII cognac for dessert. Keep pouring." I watched Julian check his earpiece. He looked at me confused, but he nodded. I leaned against the wall, crossing my ankles. "Eat Brad. Drink Victoria. fill your stomachs, because when the bill comes, it is going to cost you a lot more than money. It is going to cost you your freedom. I looked at the notifications stacking up on my screen. Transaction approved $500. Transaction approved $3,000. They were literally eating their way into prison. And I was the chef serving the last meal. I watched from the darkness of the shadow box as the waiters cleared the caviar tins. The mood down at table 1 had shifted from tense to triumphant. They had consumed thousands of dollars of my food, and now they were drunk on their own perceived power. Victoria leaned back in her chair, swirling her wine glass, her face flushed with the satisfaction of a woman who believes she has successfully rewritten history. "You know, Tiffany," Victoria said, her voice booming through the speakers in my private room, "the most important thing for a young couple is a stable home. That is why I told Brad years ago that I wouldn't let him live in some rented shoebox. The Vances don't rent. We own." I sat up straighter in my leather chair. I knew exactly where this was going. Tiffany widened her eyes, playing the part of the impressed ingenue perfectly. "Oh, I love Brad's apartment. The view of the Hudson River is to die for. It must have cost a fortune." Victoria waved her hand dismissively, as if millions of dollars were pocket change. "Well, Manhattan real estate is a beast, but for my son no price is too high. I bought that penthouse for him right after he got promoted. It was my gift. A little nest egg to ensure he always had a roof over his head regardless of who he was married to." I felt a cold laugh bubble up in my throat, but I suppressed it. I looked down at the iPad in my lap. I navigated to the real estate folder and pulled up the deed for the property at 101 Warren Street. There it was. The purchase price was $4.2 million. The down payment was $1.5 million. The source of funds was a wire transfer from Aura Holdings, LLC, my company. Victoria didn't pay a dime. She didn't even pay the closing costs. The only reason her name appeared anywhere near that apartment was because Brad had begged me 5 years ago. He had cried about how his mother felt useless, about how she wanted to feel like the matriarch who provided for her family. He asked if we could put her name on the deed as a secondary honorary owner, just so she could brag to her bridge club that she owned property in Tribeca. I had been young. I had been in love. And I had been stupid. I agreed to let her name be on the paper, knowing full well that I held the mortgage and the actual equity. Now, listening to her take credit for my hard work was like swallowing glass. It was a stretch at the time. Victoria continued lying with the ease of a sociopath. I had to liquidate some bonds, but I told the broker I said I want the best for Bradley. And now, Tiffany, it will be your home. You can redecorate it however you like. Get rid of that awful beige furniture Chloe picked out. It looks like a dentist's waiting room. I looked at the furniture she was insulting. It was custom Roche Beaubois. I had spent months curating that space. "I am so grateful," Victoria Tiffany said, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. "You are so generous. My dad was saying just the other day how rare it is to find a family that actually supports each other financially. Most people are so selfish. Selfish." I opened the banking app again. I looked at the mortgage payment history. Every month for the last 60 months, $15,000 had left my account to pay for the roof over their heads. Victoria had never even bought a toaster for that house. I tapped the screen, pulling up a specific document. It was a foreclosure notice I had prepared weeks ago but never filed. It was a nuclear option I had saved for a rainy day. Technically, since I held the private mortgage through my holding company, I was the bank. And Brad had missed the last 3 payments because he was spending his salary on Tiffany. I looked down at Victoria, who was now showing Tiffany photos of the apartment on her phone. "You bought the house, Victoria," I whispered to the empty glass room. "That is funny, because according to the Bank of Chloe, you are currently residing in my asset, and eviction notices don't care about your bridge club bragging rights. I didn't file the notice digitally. Not yet. I wanted to hand-deliver the news. I wanted to see the look on her face when she realized that the home she claimed to own was actually a prison I controlled. And I held the only key. The conversation at the table drifted, but the air remained thick with their entitlement. They truly believed they were untouchable. They believed the apartment, the car, the lifestyle, it was all their birthright. They had erased me from the narrative so completely that I was nothing more than a ghost haunting the edges of their success. But ghosts have a way of coming back, and this house was about to become very haunted. Down below, the waiter poured another round of the $12,000 wine. The laughter got louder, the insults got sharper. But I wasn't listening to the lies anymore. I was counting the seconds until the truth came crashing down. Suddenly, the atmosphere at table 1 changed. The heavy, self-congratulatory talk softened into something stickier, something more performative. Brad stood up, swaying slightly from the alcohol. He tapped his glass again, demanding silence from his own family. "I want to propose a toast," Brad slurred, his face flushed red. "To Tiffany." The table cooed. "To the woman who saved me." Brad continued, looking down at her with a sloppy grin. "You know, for years I felt like I was drowning. I was coming home to a woman who was cold, who was distant, who didn't understand my ambition. I felt like I was living with a roommate, not a wife." I watched him speak. Cold, distant. I was working 18-hour days to fund the lifestyle he felt entitled to. I was building an empire so he could play dress-up in a suit I bought. But then I met Tiff. Brad said, his voice cracking with emotion. And suddenly, color came back into the world. She makes me feel like a man. She lets me lead. She doesn't challenge me. She supports me. That is what a real wife does. Tiffany beamed, tears welling up in her eyes. "Oh, Brad." "Kiss her!" Marcus shouted from the other side of the table, slamming his hand on the linen tablecloth. "Seal the deal, brother. Show us what true love looks like." The chant started low, then built up. "Kiss her. Kiss her. Kiss her." It was grotesque. They were in a Michelin star restaurant, acting like frat boys at a keg party. Other diners turned to look, some with amusement, some with disgust. Brad leaned down. Tiffany stood up to meet him. And then, right there in the center of my restaurant, under the crystal chandeliers I had installed with my own money, my husband kissed his mistress. It wasn't a quick peck. It was a deep, mauling production. He grabbed her waist. She wrapped her arms around his neck. It was a claim of ownership. It was a public declaration that I was dead to him. The table erupted in applause. Victoria clapped the loudest, a vindictive smile plastered on her face. Marcus whistled. I watched it all on the 4K monitor. I watched the betrayal in high definition. I saw the way Brad's hand slid down her back. I saw the way Tiffany glanced at the camera as if she knew subconsciously that she was performing for an audience. Something inside me snapped. Not a loud snap like a breaking bone, but a quiet final click, like a lock engaging. For years I had held back. I had protected his ego. I had hidden my success so he wouldn't feel small. I had let his mother insult me so he wouldn't have to choose sides. I had swallowed my pride 1,000 times to keep the peace, and this was my reward, a public execution of my dignity. I looked at the wine glass in my hand. It was empty. I set it down on the marble table. The sound was sharp in the silence of the shadow box. I stood up. My legs felt strong. My heartbeat was slow, steady, rhythmic. I walked over to the full-length mirror near the door. I looked at myself. I didn't see the tired freelancer in pajamas anymore. I didn't see the dutiful wife. I saw the CEO. I saw the owner. I saw the woman who signed the checks. I adjusted the lapels of my black blazer. I smoothed down the fabric of my dress. I checked my reflection one last time. They wanted a show. They wanted to celebrate the end of Chloe Vance Fine. I reached for the earpiece on the table and put it in my ear. Henri I said, my voice ice cold. "I am here, madame. Cut the music I ordered. Kill the lights on the main floor. Leave a single spotlight on table 1. There was a pause. The entire floor, "Madame, do it." And Henri, "Yes, madame, unlock the door to the shadow box. I am coming down. It is time to perform." The door to the shadow box clicked shut behind me, sealing away the safety of the observation room. I stood alone in the narrow service corridor for a heartbeat, adjusting the cuffs of my blazer. I took a deep breath, not to calm my nerves, but to oxygenate my blood for the performance. My heart rate was steady at 60 beats per minute. I checked my reflection in the darkened glass of the elevator doors. The woman staring back wasn't the wife who cooked lasagna on Sundays, hoping for a compliment. She was the predator who had just unlocked the cage. I tapped the small transmitter in my ear. Now Henri. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. 1 second, the Obsidian was alive with the low murmur of conversation, the clinking of silverware, and the smooth notes of a live jazz quartet playing in the corner. The next second, the world ended. The music cut out mid-note. The warm ambient lighting that bathed the dining room in a golden glow vanished. The entire restaurant plunged into total darkness. Gasps rippled through the room. I heard the sound of a glass shattering against the floor somewhere to my left. People froze. In a city like New York, a sudden blackout usually meant a power grid failure or something far worse. The fear in the room was palpable, a sharp metallic scent in the air. For 5 seconds, I let them sit in the pitch black. I let the confusion curdle into anxiety. I let Victoria and Brad wonder if the bill they couldn't pay had finally shut the lights off. Then I gave the second signal. A single high-intensity spotlight snapped on. It didn't illuminate the stage. It didn't illuminate the entrance. It beamed directly down onto Table 1, trapping the Vance family in a cone of blinding white light. They looked like specimens pinned to a dissection board. They shielded their eyes, squinting against the glare, exposed and vulnerable, while the rest of the room remained hidden in the shadows. That was my cue. I stepped out from the mezzanine shadows and began my descent down the grand central staircase. The only sound in the cavernous room was the rhythmic, sharp impact of my heels against the marble steps. Click, click, click. It was a slow, deliberate tempo. The sound echoed off of the high ceilings, announcing my arrival before anyone could even see me. I walked into the edge of the spotlight's spill, the light catching the sharp tailoring of my Alexander McQueen suit and the cold glint of the diamond earrings I had bought with the profits from my third hotel acquisition. I saw the moment they recognized me. Brad was the first. He was still half standing, his lips wet from kissing his mistress. His face went from flushed intoxication to a ghostly, sickly white. He slumped back into his chair as if his strings had been cut. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked like a man waking up from a dream directly into a nightmare. Tiffany looked around wildly, pulling the stolen shawl tighter around her shoulders. She didn't understand the dynamics of the room. She only knew that the spotlight was too bright and the woman walking down the stairs looked dangerous. But Victoria didn't look scared. She looked incensed. She stood up, kicking her chair back. The legs scraped harshly against the floor. She slammed her napkin onto the table right next to the empty tins of caviar she had gorged on. "This is unacceptable," she screeched. Her voice was shrill, shattering the carefully cultivated silence I had created. I kept walking. I reached the bottom of the stairs and stepped onto the main floor. The diners at the surrounding tables, invisible in the dark, but watching intently, held their breath. They knew a show when they saw one. Victoria pointed a shaking finger at me. "You," she yelled, her face twisting into a mask of ugly entitlement. "How dare you? You have the audacity to crash my private event." After I explicitly told the management to keep the trash on the curb, I didn't stop. I walked past the empty hostess stand. I walked past the sommelier who was bowing his head in respect. I walked straight toward the light. "Brad, do something," Victoria commanded, grabbing her son's shoulder and shaking him. "She is ruining everything. Call the police. Tell them your stalker ex-wife has broken in." Brad couldn't move. He was staring at me, paralyzed by a cognitive dissonance he couldn't process. The Chloe he knew wore oversized sweaters and apologized for taking up too much space on the couch. The Chloe walking toward him was 10 feet tall and radiated a cold, lethal energy. He couldn't reconcile the two. I stopped 5 feet from the table. I stood just outside the harsh circle of the spotlight, a silhouette looming in the darkness. Victoria realized her son was useless. She turned her fury toward the invisible staff in the shadows. "Manager," she screamed, clapping her hands together imperiously. "Where is the manager? I am paying $40,000 for this dinner. I demand service. Get security in here right now." Her voice echoed around the silent room. "I demand you remove this woman immediately." Victoria continued, her voice cracking with rage. "She is trespassing. She is harassing us. Drag her out by her hair if you have to. I don't care. Just get her out of my sight." From the shadows behind me, two large figures emerged. They were my head of security, a former Mossad agent named David, and his second-in-command. They were dressed in black suits that cost more than Marcus's entire wardrobe. They moved silently, stepping into the edge of the light. Victoria saw them and triumphed. Finally, she huffed, adjusting her sequined dress. "It is about time. Do your jobs. Get this peasant out of here. She is disturbing the elite." She pointed at me again, smiling a cruel Victoria smile. "Goodbye, Chloe," she sneered. "Go back to whatever gutter you crawled out of. You don't belong here. You never did." I stood perfectly still. I looked at the security guards. David looked back at me. He didn't move toward me. He didn't reach for my arm. He simply clasped his hands behind his back and bowed slightly. Victoria's smile faltered. She looked from the guards to me and back to the guards. "Why aren't you moving?" she demanded, her voice rising in panic. "I gave you an order. Throw her out." I took one step forward, entering the full brightness of the spotlight. The light hit me, and for the first time, they could see my face clearly. I wasn't crying. I wasn't angry. I looked bored. "You seem confused, Victoria," I said. My voice was calm, conversational, but in the acoustic silence of the room, it carried to every corner. "Confused," Victoria spat. "I am not confused. I am a customer, and the customer is always right. Now remove her." I tilted my head slightly to the side. "You are right about one thing," I said. "Security is here." I gestured to David. He took a step forward, but not toward me. He moved toward the table. He moved toward Brad. Victoria stepped in front of her son, her arms spread wide like a bird protecting its nest. "Don't you dare touch him," she hissed. "Do you know who we are? My son is a vice president. My son-in-law is a partner at King and Sterling. We will sue this restaurant into the ground. We will have your badges. We will have your jobs." Marcus stood up now, finding his courage. "She is right," Marcus barked, trying to summon his courtroom authority. "This is false imprisonment. This is harassment. I am recording this. If you lay a hand on anyone at this table, I will own this building by morning." I laughed. It was a soft, dry sound. "Own the building," I repeated. "That is an ambitious goal, Marcus, especially considering you can't even pay for the steak you just ordered." "What are you talking about?" Marcus snapped. "We have money. We have class, something you wouldn't understand." I took another step closer. I was now standing right next to Victoria. I could see the heavy makeup settling into the lines of her face. I could smell the fear radiating off her beneath the expensive perfume. "You keep calling for security, Victoria," I said softly. "You keep demanding that they throw out the trespasser, the unwanted guest, the person who doesn't belong." I paused, letting the silence stretch until it was painful. "But you are making a critical error in judgment." "What error?" Victoria whispered, her bravado flickering. "You think security works for you?" I said. I turned to David. "David?" I asked. "Who signs your paycheck?" David looked at Victoria, his face made of stone. Then he looked at me. "You do, Madam Vance?" he said clearly. The color drained from Victoria's face so fast it looked like a physical blow. She staggered back, gripping the edge of the table for support. "Madam Vance," she stammered. I turned to the sommelier in the shadows. "Julienne," I asked, "who owns the wine cellar these people have been drinking from?" "You do, Madame Vance." Julienne's voice floated from the darkness. I turned back to Victoria. Her eyes were wide, darting around the room, trying to find an escape, trying to find a logic that made sense. But there was no escape. The trap had snapped shut. "You called for security to remove the person who doesn't own this restaurant?" I said, my voice hardening into steel. I looked at Brad. I looked at Marcus. I looked at Tiffany. And finally, I drilled my gaze into Victoria. "So I suppose you are right, Victoria. Security does have a job to do." I raised my hand and pointed a finger at the door. "David," I said. "Yes, Madame, throw them out." The command hung in the air like a guillotine blade waiting to drop. "Throw them out." The words were simple, but their impact was seismic. For a split second, the Vance family looked at David and his security team with genuine confusion, as if I had spoken in a language they did not understand. In their world, security guards were furniture. They were low-wage workers who existed to open doors and keep the rabble away from people like them. The idea that these men would turn against a vice president and a partner at a law firm was inconceivable to them. Victoria was the first to break the silence. She let out a laugh that sounded more like a bark. She turned to Marcus, her eyes wide with incredulous amusement. "Did you hear that, Marcus? She thinks she can give orders. She thinks she has authority here." Marcus adjusted his tie, stepping forward to block David's path. He pulled himself up to his full height, projecting the arrogance that usually worked in a courtroom. "Back off," Marcus warned the guards. "You are making a mistake that will cost you your careers. This woman is a trespasser. She is mentally unstable. If you touch a single hair on my head, I will sue this establishment for assault battery and false imprisonment. I will own your pension funds by the end of the week." David didn't blink. He didn't look at Marcus. He looked at me, waiting for the confirmation to engage. I raised a hand, signaling David to hold for just a moment. I wanted to see how far they would go. I wanted to give them one last chance to dig their graves so deep that they would never climb out. "You are threatening my staff, Marcus," I said calmly. "That is another felony to add to the list." "Shut up," Chloe Brad shouted. He had finally found his voice, emboldened by his mother and brother-in-law. "Just get out. You are embarrassing yourself. You are ruining the best night of my life. Can't you see that nobody wants you here?" I looked at my husband. He was sweating. His eyes were darting around, terrified that his carefully constructed facade was cracking. And then Tiffany moved. She had been sitting quietly, clutching her stolen necklace, watching the power dynamic shift back and forth. She saw an opening. She saw a chance to prove her loyalty to the clan. She saw an opportunity to demonstrate that she was the alpha female and I was just the discarded ex-wife. She stood up. She grabbed the bottle of wine that was sitting on the table. It wasn't the Chateau Margaux. It was a Pinot Noir I had selected for the main course, a vintage that cost $400 a bottle. She didn't pour it into a glass. She held the bottle by the neck like a weapon. "You just don't get it, do you?" Tiffany sneered, stepping around the table. She walked toward me, her hips swaying, her face twisted into a mask of mean girl superiority. "You think you can just walk in here and ruin our dinner? You think you are special because you wore a suit?" She stopped 2 feet in front of me. I didn't flinch. I didn't step back. I looked at her with the dispassionate interest of a scientist observing a lab rat. Tiffany looked me up and down. She scanned my outfit. She saw a black blazer and matching trousers. To her untrained eye, it was just a black suit. She didn't recognize the fabric. She didn't know that the wool-silk blend was woven in a specific mill in Italy that only supplied 3 fashion houses in the world. She didn't know that the cut was bespoke, tailored by the head of the atelier at Dior in Paris. To Tiffany, who wore logos to prove her worth, quiet luxury looked like poverty. "You look like a waiter," Tiffany laughed. "Did you buy that at a discount outlet? Is that why you are so bitter? Because you have to wear polyester while I am wearing silk?" I didn't answer. I just watched her hand tighten around the bottle. "I am doing this for your own good," Tiffany said. "You need to wake up. You need to wash the desperation off you." And then she swung her arm. She didn't hit me with the bottle. She splashed the contents forward. The red liquid arched through the air in slow motion. It hit my chest first. Then it soaked into the lapels of my blazer. It dripped down onto my trousers. It splashed onto my shoes. The cold wine seeped through the fabric, chilling my skin. The smell of fermented grapes and alcohol filled the space between us. The room went dead silent. Even the security guards froze, shocked by the sudden escalation of physical aggression. I stood there dripping. I didn't wipe it off. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply looked down at the stains spreading across the $6,000 jacket. Then I looked at the puddle forming around my $1,200 shoes. Tiffany laughed. It was a cruel, high-pitched sound. "Oops," she said, covering her mouth with exaggerated innocence. My hand slipped. "But honestly, it is an improvement. At least now you have some color on you." Victoria clapped her hands, delighted. "Bravo, Tiffany. Finally, someone put this creature in her place." Brad chuckled nervously, then joined in the laughter when he saw his mother approving. "Yeah, good one, Tiff." Tiffany stepped closer, emboldened by their approval. She leaned into my face, her breath smelling of the caviar she hadn't paid for. "Go home, Chloe," she whispered. "Go wash your clothes. You smell like poverty." The line hung in the air. "You smell like poverty." I looked at her. I really looked at her. I looked at the dress she was wearing. It was a knockoff Hervé bandage dress probably bought from an online boutique for $80. I could see the loose threads on the hem. I looked at her shoes. They were red bottoms, but the shade of red was wrong. They were counterfeits, and the bag sitting on her chair was a Louis Vuitton Neverfull that was collapsing on itself because the canvas was too thin. She was covered in fake labels, wearing a stolen necklace standing in a restaurant she couldn't afford, insulting a woman wearing a bespoke Dior suit that cost more than her father's car. The irony was so sharp it almost cut me. I slowly reached into my pocket. Tiffany flinched, thinking I was going to pull out a weapon. I pulled out a silk handkerchief. I dabbed the wine from my chin. "You smell like poverty." I repeated her words slowly, tasting them. I looked at the stain on my jacket. "This jacket is from the Dior Bar collection." I said, my voice conversational. "It retails for $5,800. The trousers are $2,000. The blouse underneath, which is now ruined, is pure silk from the row valued at $1,500. I looked up at Tiffany. Her smile faltered slightly. "You just destroyed almost $10,000 worth of clothing, Tiffany." Tiffany scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Yeah, right. Like you have 10 grand. You are probably wearing a knockoff you found on eBay. Stop lying." I didn't get angry. I got analytical. "And the wine," I continued. "You poured a 2018 Pinot Noir. That is another $400, plus the cleaning fee for the marble floor you just soiled." I took a step toward her. She took a step back, sensing the shift in energy. "You call this poverty, Tiffany?" I asked, gesturing to my ruined suit. "This stain costs more than your entire outfit. That dress you are wearing is polyester blend. I can see the pilling under the arm. Your bag is a Chinatown special. The only thing of value on your body is the necklace you stole from my bedroom." I stopped inches from her face. "So let's talk about poverty," I whispered. "Poverty isn't about what you wear. Poverty is needing to steal a necklace to feel valuable. Poverty is needing to humiliate someone else to feel powerful. Poverty is standing in a restaurant you can't pay for drinking wine you didn't buy and pretending you belong." I turned to Marcus, who was watching with a stunned expression. "Marcus, you are a lawyer," I said. "I believe destruction of personal property valued over $1,000 is a Class E felony. Coupled with the grand larceny of the necklace, Tiffany is looking at 5 to 10 years in prison." I turned back to Tiffany. "You wanted to make a splash," I said. "Congratulations, you just drowned yourself." I turned to David. "Now, David," I said, my voice snapping like a whip, "get this trash out of my restaurant, and make sure the police are waiting on the curb." David stepped forward to execute my order, his hand reaching for Tiffany's arm. But before he could make contact, Marcus lunged across the space between us. He didn't attack physically. He knew better than to fight a former Mossad agent. Instead, he reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper stamped with a red seal. He held it up like a holy relic, thrusting it into David's face. "Stop!" Marcus roared. "If you touch her, you are violating a federal court order." David paused. He was a professional. He knew that physical force was the last resort, and legal documents, even questionable ones, had to be assessed. He looked at the paper, then at me. I held up a hand signaling David to wait. I was curious. Marcus was desperate, and desperate men make sloppy mistakes. I wanted to see exactly how sloppy this one was. "Let him speak, David," I said softly. "I want to see what kind of shield he thinks he has." Marcus straightened his suit jacket, regaining his composure now that he had the floor. He smoothed the paper out on the table right next to the wine stain Tiffany had left. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and triumph. "You really thought you could just walk in here and play boss?" Marcus asked, shaking his head. "You thought we didn't prepare for this. We knew you were unstable, Chloe. We knew you wouldn't let Brad go without a fight. So we took the liberty of protecting ourselves." He tapped the document with his index finger. "This," he announced, his voice projecting to the silent onlookers in the restaurant, "is an emergency temporary restraining order. It was granted by a judge this afternoon. It states clearly that you, Chloe Vance, are a danger to yourself and others. It prohibits you from coming within 100 feet of Bradley Vance, Victoria Vance, or any of their known associates." Victoria let out a sigh of relief, her posture relaxing instantly. "Thank God for the law," she muttered. Marcus continued reading from the document with the cadence of a preacher. "The order grants immediate police intervention if violated. It cites your history of erratic behavior, financial irresponsibility, and verbal harassment. By standing here right now, you are in direct violation of a court mandate." He looked up at me, a smug smile playing on his lips. "So here is how this ends, Chloe. You are going to turn around and walk out that door voluntarily. If you do, we might ask the judge for leniency during the sentencing hearing. But if you stay here for one more minute, I will call the precinct, and you will be leaving in handcuffs." Brad looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Just go, Chloe. Please, don't make this worse than it already is. Marcus is a partner at King and Sterling. He doesn't lose. Just go home." I looked at the document. From 5 feet away, it looked impressive. It had a seal. It had a signature. It had all the legal jargon bolded in the right places. To a layperson, to a scared housewife, or to a restaurant manager worried about liability, this piece of paper was terrifying. It was a weapon designed to silence and intimidate, but there was a problem. I stepped closer to the table, ignoring Marcus's shout of "Stay back." I leaned over and looked at the document. I scanned the text. I looked at the seal. I looked at the judge's signature at the bottom. And then I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It wasn't a nervous smile. It was the faint, cold smile of a teacher watching a student fail a test they tried to cheat on. Marcus saw the smile. He didn't like it. "Why are you smiling?" he snapped. "This isn't funny. This is a felony charge waiting to happen." I looked up at him. "Marcus," I said quietly, "you are a partner at King and Sterling, correct?" "That is right," he said, puffing out his chest. "And you specialize in corporate law. I handle the biggest mergers in the city." "Then you should probably stick to mergers," I said, "because your knowledge of family law is embarrassing." I pointed to the top of the document. "First of all," I said, my voice steady and clear, "this is a template downloaded from LegalZoom. I can see the watermark on the bottom right corner if I squint hard enough." Marcus turned pale. He tried to cover the corner of the paper with his hand. "That is standard formatting," he stammered. "Secondly," I continued, pointing to the seal. "That is the seal for the Southern District of New York. That is a federal court. Restraining orders for domestic disputes are handled by family court or the state Supreme Court. A federal judge wouldn't sign this if you paid him." I looked at Victoria, who was watching the exchange with growing horror. And thirdly, I said, looking back at Marcus, "And this is my favorite part. You claim this was signed this afternoon." "Yes," Marcus said, his voice rising. "Judge Harrison signed it at 3 o'clock. "Judge Harrison," I repeated. "Yes, a personal friend." "That is unfortunate," I said, "because Judge Harrison died of a heart attack last Tuesday. I went to his funeral. I sent flowers." The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavy and suffocating. Brad looked at Marcus. "You said he signed it." Marcus was sweating profusely now. Beads of perspiration were forming on his forehead. He started to gather the papers up, trying to hide them back in his briefcase. It might have been a different judge," he mumbled. "It is a big district. I might have misspoken the name. But the order is valid. The order stands." I laughed softly. "Marcus," I said, "forging a judge's signature is a crime. Presenting a forged court document to intimidate a witness is another crime. And doing it in front of a room full of witnesses? That is just stupidity." I looked at the security team. David was grinning. He knew exactly what was happening. "You tried to use a fake piece of paper to kick me out of my own building," I said. "You tried to gaslight me into believing I was a criminal. You tried to scare me into submission." I shook my head slowly. "But you forgot the first rule of war, Marcus. Know your enemy." I reached out and plucked the paper from his hand. He was too stunned to stop me. I held it up to the light. "This isn't a restraining order," I said. "This is a resignation letter." I ripped the paper in half. The sound of the tearing paper was loud and satisfying. I ripped it again and again until it was nothing but confetti. I let the pieces fall onto the table, landing in the leftover caviar and the spilled wine. "Your threat is invalid," I said. I looked at Marcus, whose arrogance had completely evaporated, replaced by the terrified realization that he had just committed career suicide. "Now," I said, "I believe we were in the middle of an eviction." I turned back to David. "David," I said, "I am tired of looking at them. Please, finish it." David stopped moving toward them. He didn't stop because he was afraid of Brad. He stopped because I raised my hand. I wanted to hear this. I wanted to see exactly how far my husband was willing to go to preserve his fragile ego in front of his mistress and his mother. Brad stood up, shoving the security guard's hand off his shoulder. He grabbed the blue folder that Marcus had tried to hide earlier, the one containing the divorce papers. He didn't hand it to me. He threw it. The heavy folder slid across the linen tablecloth, knocking over a crystal water glass. It spun to a stop right at the edge of the table, inches from my ruined Dior jacket. "You want to play the big shot?" Brad screamed, his voice cracking with adrenaline. "You want to act like you run this place fine? Let's see how much you run when you are homeless." He jabbed a finger at the folder. "That is the end of us, Chloe, and don't think for a second that this is going to be a 50-50 split." Marcus made sure of that. Marcus, realizing that the eviction was paused quickly, stepped back into his lawyer persona. He adjusted his tie, trying to look authoritative despite the fact that he had just been caught with a fake court order. "Brad is right," Marcus said, his voice regaining some of its oily confidence. "We have structured this petition based on your lack of financial contribution to the marriage. In the state of New York, equitable distribution considers the earning power of each spouse. Brad is a vice president. You are unemployed. Therefore, we are claiming 100% of the marital assets." Brad laughed, a cruel, ugly sound that echoed in the silent restaurant. "Did you hear that, Chloe? 100%? He started listing the items on his fingers, pacing back and forth like a man who had just won the lottery. "The penthouse in Tribeca. That is mine. My mother bought it for me. You are out." I watched him. The penthouse was legally owned by a shell company called Aurora Real Estate, of which I was the sole signatory. Brad didn't own a single brick of that building. "The Tesla Model X," Brad continued. "Mine. I drive it to work. I pay for the charging. You can take the subway." I blinked. The Tesla was a company car leased through Aura Hospitality. I paid the $600 monthly insurance premium. "The investment accounts," Brad shouted, pointing at his chest. "The $400,000 we have in savings. That is my hard-earned money. That is my salary. You don't get a penny of it." Marcus found a loophole. "Since you never contributed to the deposits, you have no claim to the withdrawals." I almost smiled. The $400,000 in our joint account wasn't his salary. His salary barely covered his tailored suits and his bar tabs. That money was an allowance I transferred from my trust fund every month to make him feel like a provider. He was claiming ownership of money I had literally given him as an allowance. And the dog Brad finished leaning over the table, his face twisted with malice. "I am keeping Buster. You can't afford to feed him. You can't afford a vet bill. I am taking the dog, and Tiffany and I are going to give him a real home." That was the only thing that hurt. Buster was my golden retriever. I walked him every morning. I was the one who nursed him when he had surgery last year. Brad hadn't walked him in 6 months. So here is the deal. Brad sneered, slamming his hand down on the folder. "You sign this right now. You agree to walk away with nothing but the clothes on your back, or I will destroy you in court. I will make sure everyone knows you are a leech. I will make sure you never get a job in this city." He looked at Tiffany, who was smiling triumphantly. "See, babe," Brad said to her, "I told you I would handle it. She is nothing. She is just a squatter I am finally evicting." He turned back to me, his eyes cold and dead. "Kneel down and sign it, Chloe. If you want to leave this restaurant without being arrested for harassment, you sign my terms. You give me everything." I looked at the folder. I looked at the man I had married 3 years ago. I tried to find the person I had fallen in love with, the man who used to bring me coffee in bed, the man who promised to protect me. But that man didn't exist. Maybe he never existed. Maybe he was just a character Brad played until he found a better audience. The man standing in front of me was a stranger. A greedy, delusional, cruel stranger who was trying to steal my life while standing in the middle of my empire. He wanted everything. He wanted the house I bought, the car I leased, the money I earned, and the dog I loved. He thought he was holding a royal flush. He thought I was bluffing with a pair of twos. He had no idea that I wasn't playing poker. I was playing chess, and he was already in checkmate. He wanted me to sign. He wanted me to waive my rights to his assets. He didn't realize that by signing that paper, I wasn't losing his assets. I was protecting mine. If I signed a document stating that we were dividing our assets as of this date, and that he was keeping his property, and I was keeping mine, he was effectively waiving his right to any future discovery of my hidden wealth. He was voluntarily cutting himself off from the Aura Hospitality billions because he was too busy fighting over a $400,000 savings account. He was handing me the greatest gift a billionaire could ask for, a clean break. I stepped forward. The room was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the refrigerator units in the kitchen. I walked up to the table. I didn't look at the caviar. I didn't look at the wine. I looked at the blue folder. I reached out and opened it. The document was titled Stipulation of Settlement. It was thick. Dozens of pages of legal jargon designed to strip a wife of her dignity. I didn't turn the page. I didn't look at the clauses. I didn't read the fine print about the alimony waiver or the non-disparagement agreement. I looked at Marcus. "Do you have a pen?" I asked. My voice was calm. It wasn't the voice of a defeated woman. It was the voice of a CEO closing a merger. Marcus looked confused. He expected a fight. He expected tears. He expected me to beg for a better deal. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a Mont Blanc fountain pen. "Use this," he said suspiciously, "but read it first, Chloe. Once you sign it is binding." I took the pen. It was heavy, expensive, probably bought with the bonus he got for destroying some other family. I looked at Brad. He was smirking. He thought he had broken me. "You are doing the right thing," Chloe Brad said, crossing his arms. "Just give up. It is easier that way. Give up." I looked down at the signature line, the line that said wife. I wasn't a wife anymore, not to him. I uncapped the pen. The black ink was wet and permanent. I didn't hesitate. I didn't shake. I pressed the nib to the paper and signed my name, Chloe Vance, a large sweeping signature. It took less than 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, I legally severed myself from his debt. I severed myself from his toxicity, and most importantly, I legally locked him out of my real assets. By signing his version of the split, I was agreeing that what he saw was what there was. He couldn't come back later and ask for half of Aura Group because he had just declared in writing that the division of assets was final based on his terms. He thought he was robbing me. In reality, he was signing a waiver for billions of dollars. I capped the pen with a sharp click. I closed the folder. I looked up. Brad was grinning. Victoria was clapping silently. Tiffany looked relieved. They thought they had won. I handed the pen back to Marcus. "Thank you," I said. Marcus took the pen, looking at the folder, then at me. He seemed unsettled by the speed of my surrender. You didn't read it," he stammered. "I don't need to read it," I said. "I know exactly what it says. It says you are greedy. It says you are short-sighted. And it says you are free." I picked up the folder and shoved it across the table toward Brad. It hit his chest and he grabbed it, clutching it like a trophy. "There," I said. "You have what you wanted. You have the house. You have the car. You have the savings." I took a step back, widening the distance between us. Brad laughed, waving the folder in the air. "I win. I told you, Mom. I told you she would fold." I looked at him with pity, genuine, deep pity. "You didn't win, Brad," I said softly. "You just signed your own death warrant." He stopped laughing. What I pointed at the paper in his hand. "You just demanded to keep the penthouse," I said, "which means you are now solely responsible for the mortgage payments. Payments you haven't made in 3 months because you were spending your money on her." I pointed at Tiffany. You just demanded the car, I continued, which means you are now liable for the lease agreement, the lease that expires next week with a balloon payment of $20,000 due upon return. I pointed at the bank account clause. And you demanded the savings, I said, which is fine. But since you claimed all financial assets as your own, you also claimed all financial liabilities. That includes the $60,000 in credit card debt you racked up on the joint Amex. That is yours now, Brad. All of it. Brad's face fell. He looked down at the paper, his hands starting to shake. But you pay those bills, he whispered. Not anymore, I said. I just signed the paper. You said I leave with nothing. That means I leave with 0 bills. I smoothed down my wine-stained jacket. I felt lighter. I felt cleaner despite the mess on my clothes. You wanted to strip me bare, I said, looking him in the eye. But you forgot that when you strip someone of everything, you also strip them of the burden of carrying you. I turned to Victoria. And you, I said. You wanted me out of the family congratulations. You got your wish. But remember this moment. Remember the weight of that folder in your son's hand, because that piece of paper is the only thing of value you have left. I turned to David, who was waiting patiently in the shadows. David, I said, the divorce is finalized. They are no longer family. They are just trespassers who haven't paid their bill. I walked toward the exit. Throw them out, I repeated. And David, yes, madam, keep the dog. I turned my back on them and started walking toward the heavy oak doors that led to the exit. My heels clicked against the marble floor, a steady rhythmic sound that marked the final seconds of my previous life. Behind me, the noise of their celebration began to rise again. I heard the clinking of glasses. I heard Victoria's shrill laughter. I heard Brad exhaling a sigh of relief, likely reaching for another glass of the wine he thought he had successfully stolen. They truly believed I was walking out into the cold night, defeated and penniless. They believed they were the victors feasting in the castle they had just conquered. But I wasn't walking to the exit to leave. I was walking to the exit to lock it. I stopped 10 feet from the door. I didn't turn around. I simply raised my right hand into the air and snapped my fingers. The sound was sharp, cutting through the murmurs of the dining room like a pistol shot. Instantly, the service doors on both sides of the main hall burst open. This wasn't just David and his 2 guards anymore. This was the full detail. 10 men dressed in tactical black suits poured into the room. They moved with the synchronized precision of a paramilitary unit. They didn't run. They glided, forming a perimeter around the dining floor, effectively sealing every exit. At the same time, Henri, the general manager, stepped out from the shadows near the kitchen. He wasn't looking at the floor. He wasn't cowering before Victoria's temper. He walked straight toward me, his head held high, carrying a silver tray with a single black envelope on it. The laughter at table 1 died instantly. Victoria stood up, her napkin clutching at her throat. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice trembling slightly. "Who are these people? I told you to get security, not an army." She looked at the men surrounding the room, then pointed a shaking finger at me. "Officer!" she shouted at the nearest guard. "Arrest her! She is refusing to leave. She is disturbing the peace." The guard didn't even blink. He looked through her as if she were made of glass. Henri reached me. He stopped 3 feet away and bowed. It wasn't a polite nod. It was a deep, formal bow of deference reserved for royalty or heads of state. "Madam President," Henri said, his voice projecting clearly across the silent room. "The perimeter is secure. The police have been notified and are 5 minutes out." I slowly turned around to face the table. Victoria's jaw dropped. Brad looked like he had been slapped. Marcus froze his hand halfway to his wine glass. "Madam," President Victoria whispered the words, tasting like ash in her mouth. Henri straightened up and looked at me, ignoring the Vances completely. "How would you like us to proceed, ma'am? Do you want us to drag them out to the curb immediately, or shall we detain them here until the authorities arrive to process the charges?" The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a lung. Brad stood up, his legs shaking so hard the table rattled. Wait a minute." He looked at Henri, then at me. "Why are you calling her that? She is just a freelancer. She is nobody." Henri turned his gaze on Brad. The look of contempt on the Frenchman's face was withering. "Mr. Vance," Henri said, his tone dripping with ice, You are speaking to the chairman and sole owner of Aura Hospitality Group. She owns this building. She owns this restaurant. She owns the catering company you hired. She owns the very chair you are sitting on. No, Brad stammered, shaking his head violently. That is impossible. She is broke. She asks me for money for groceries. I took a step forward. The security guards tightened the circle, stepping closer to the table. The threat of physical force was palpable. You really didn't look, did you? I asked softly. You lived with me for 3 years. You slept in my bed. And you never once asked where the money came from. You just assumed you were the sun, and I was orbiting you. I walked past Henri and stood directly in front of the table. You wanted security, Victoria, I said. You wanted the owner. You wanted the best service. I spread my arms wide. Here I am. Victoria collapsed back into her chair. She looked at the opulent room, the high ceilings, the crystal chandeliers, and finally realized that all of it, every square inch of luxury she worshipped, belonged to the woman she had called trash. Twist the knife, Henri said. Yes, madame. Henri pulled a remote control from his pocket and pointed it at the far wall. The large velvet curtains that covered the main wall of the dining room began to retract. Behind them was a massive high-definition projection screen, usually reserved for corporate presentations or private screenings. The screen flickered to life. Let's look at the receipts, shall we? I said. The first image that appeared on the screen was a blown-up digital copy of the bill for Table 1. The numbers were staggering. Imperial Beluga Caviar Service, $6,000. Chateau Margaux, 2009 2 bottles, $25,000. Wagyu Tomahawk, steaks 4 orders, $1,200. Appetizers, sides service charge, total amount due, $48,450. Gasps rippled through the restaurant. The other diners who had been watching the drama unfold whispered among themselves. That is a lot of money for a Tuesday night, I said, looking at the screen. But don't worry, it has already been paid. I clicked a button on the remote I had taken from Henri. The image on the screen changed. It was now a close-up of a credit card authorization receipt. It showed the last 4 digits of the card used 8842. It showed the name on the card, Bradley Vance. But underneath the name in the section, usually reserved for the issuing bank, it read Vesta Holdings, corporate subaccount, and underneath that in bold letters, primary account holder Chloe Vance. Brad stared at the screen. His eyes bulged. You recognized the card, didn't you, Brad? I asked. The heavy black metal one. You love flashing it at bars. You love telling people it is an invite-only Amex. I stepped closer to him. It is not an Amex, Brad. It is a proprietary credit line issued by my holding company for high-level employees and dependents. I gave it to you for emergencies. I pointed at the screen. Buying your mistress caviar is not an emergency. It is embezzlement. I looked at Tiffany. She was staring at the screen doing the math. She realized that every bite she had taken, every sip of wine had been paid for by me. You have been spending my money to humiliate me, I said, and now I am freezing the account. I tapped my phone. On the screen, the status of the transaction changed from approved to revoked. Fraudulent activity. That means the bill is currently unpaid, I said. And since you just signed a document claiming full financial responsibility for your debts, I suggest you start checking your own pockets. Do you have $48,000 on you, Brad? Or maybe your mother does. Victoria looked down at her lap, avoiding eye contact. She didn't have $48, let alone $48,000. But we are not done, I said. I looked at Marcus. He was pale, sweating, trying to make himself small in his chair. You like evidence, Marcus, I said. You like discovery. So let's do some discovery. I clicked the remote again. The screen went black, then an audio waveform appeared. It was a recording. I pressed play. The voice that boomed through the restaurant speakers was unmistakable. It was Marcus recorded just 20 minutes ago. The law does not protect the poor Brad. It protects the people who can afford to weaponize it. Chloe can scream about justice all she wants. But by the time I am done with her, she will be lucky if she leaves this marriage with a suitcase of old clothes. The audio was crisp, clear, and damning. Marcus closed his eyes. He knew. He knew exactly what this meant. I clicked the remote again. A new image appeared. It was a screenshot of an email. To New York State Bar Association, Committee on Professional Standards. Subject: formal complaint against Marcus King, conspiracy to commit fraud, witness intimidation and unethical conduct. Attachments: audio_evidence_01.mp3, video_evidence_01.mp4. Status sent. I looked at Marcus. I sent that 5 minutes ago, I said. Marcus slumped in his chair. His career was over. The audio recording proved he was conspiring to hide assets and use the legal system to harass a spouse. The Bar Association would disbar him before breakfast. You recorded a privileged conversation, Marcus whispered, his voice weak. That is inadmissible. I laughed. There is no expectation of privacy in a public restaurant, Marcus, especially not when you are shouting your conspiracy at the top of your lungs, and especially not when the owner of the restaurant has signs posted at the entrance stating that the premises are under audio and video surveillance for security purposes. I pointed to the small sign near the door that nobody ever read. I own the building, Marcus. I make the rules, and you just broke all of them. I looked at the three of them. Brad the thief, Tiffany the accomplice, Marcus the fixer, and Victoria the architect. They were ruined, financially, professionally, socially. The police are on their way, I said, checking my watch. They are coming for Tiffany for grand larceny. They are coming for Brad for credit card fraud. And Marcus, I imagine they will want to talk to you about that fake restraining order you tried to pass off. I turned to Henri. Henri, bring me the bottle of Chateau Margaux they didn't finish. Henri hurried to the table, grabbed the $12,000 bottle and handed it to me. I looked at the label. It was a good year. I poured the remaining wine onto the floor right over Marcus's expensive leather shoes. It is a shame to waste it, I said, but I don't drink with criminals. I turned to the security team. Get them out of my sight and wait for the sirens. The security team stood at the perimeter of the room, their arms crossed, silent sentinels watching the collapse of a dynasty that never really existed. The smell of expensive wine soaking into the carpet mixed with the scent of fear. Brad was staring at his shoes, the reality of the $48,000 debt crushing him. Marcus was frantically typing on his phone, likely trying to delete emails that were already preserved on a server he couldn't access. But I wasn't finished. I had stripped them of their pride. I had stripped them of their legal protection. Now I was going to strip them of their shelter. I turned my attention to Victoria. She was sitting in the ruins of her birthday dinner, clutching her napkin like a lifeline. She looked smaller than she had 10 minutes ago. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a hollow, trembling confusion. She still didn't understand how the world had flipped upside down. She still believed somewhere in her delusional mind that she could go home, lock the door, and pretend this nightmare never happened. Victoria. I said, my voice cutting through the silence. You mentioned earlier that the Vances don't rent. You said you own your home. You said you provided a nest egg for your son. Victoria looked up, her eyes wet. I did, she whispered, her voice shaking. I bought that apartment. It is my name on the deed. You can't touch it. That is my sanctuary. I walked over to the projection screen. I clicked the remote one more time. A live video feed appeared. It wasn't a camera inside the restaurant. It was a security camera feed from the hallway of a luxury apartment building in Tribeca, specifically the hallway outside Penthouse B at 101 Warren Street. Brad looked at the screen and gasped. That is our front door. I pointed to the door in the video. Do you see that, Brad? I asked. Look closely at the handle. On the screen, a large red digital padlock had been clamped over the smart lock. A bright orange sticker was plastered across the wood covering the peephole. Even in the grainy video, the bold black letters on the sticker were legible. Sealed. Property of the bank. No trespassing. Victoria stood up her chair, scraping loudly against the floor. What is that? She screamed. What have you done to my house? I didn't do anything, Victoria, I said calmly. You did. Or rather, your son did. I turned to face them, enjoying the look of absolute horror on their faces. You see, when you bragged about buying that apartment, you forgot to mention who was actually paying the mortgage. You provided the signature. I provided the capital. My holding company, Aura Real Estate, holds the private mortgage on that property. I stepped closer to Brad. For 3 years, I transferred $15,000 a month into our joint account to cover that mortgage, I explained. I set it up as an automatic payment so you wouldn't have to worry about it. I let you feel like the man of the house. Brad's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. But 3 months ago, I stopped the transfer, I said. I wanted to see what would happen. I wanted to see if the vice president of operations could manage his own household expenses. I gestured to the screen. And what did you do? Brad, did you pay the mortgage? Did you secure your mother's home? Brad looked at Tiffany. He looked at the necklace around her neck. He looked at the expensive dinners they had posted on Instagram over the last few months. No, I answered for him. You spent the mortgage money on hotels. You spent it on weekend trips to the Hamptons. You spent it on gifts for your mistress. You defaulted Brad. You are 90 days past due. I looked at Victoria. The bank doesn't care about your birthday, Victoria. The bank operates on logic, and the logic dictated that since the borrower defaulted, the asset must be seized. I checked my watch. My asset recovery team arrived at the penthouse 45 minutes ago, I said. They changed the digital encryption on the locks. They sealed the premises. Your key cards no longer work. Your biometric data has been wiped from the system. Victoria grabbed Brad's arm, digging her nails into his suit jacket. Tell me she is lying, Bradley. Tell me we can go home. Brad couldn't speak. He knew it was true. He knew about the warning emails from the bank that he had ignored because he thought I would just fix it like I fixed everything else. Victoria, I said, my voice devoid of sympathy, you don't have a home to go to. Your clothes, your jewelry, your bridge club trophies, they are all locked inside a property you no longer have access to. You are effectively homeless. Victoria let out a wail that sounded like a wounded animal. She slumped against her son, sobbing uncontrollably. But we are not done with asset recovery, I said. I turned my eyes to Tiffany. She was trying to make herself invisible, shrinking away from the spotlight. She had stopped smirking. She had stopped laughing. She looked like a child who had been caught shoplifting. I walked up to her. I stood so close I could see the panic fluttering in her pulse point. That necklace, I said softly. Tiffany's hand flew up to cover the sapphire. It is mine, she squeaked. Brad gave it to me. I held out my hand, palm open, waiting. Brad gave you stolen property, Tiffany, I corrected her. That necklace was taken from my safe. I have the purchase receipt from Geneva. I have the insurance appraisal. And I have the police report number filed 6 months ago. I leaned in closer. The police are 5 minutes away, Tiffany. When they walk through those doors, they are going to look for evidence. If that necklace is on your neck when they arrive, you will be arrested for possession of stolen goods. In New York, for an item of that value that is a Class C felony, you will be booked, you will be fingerprinted, and you will go to Rikers Island tonight. Tiffany's eyes widened in terror. She looked at Brad for help, but Brad was too busy holding up his sobbing mother. She looked at Marcus, but Marcus was staring at the floor defeated. She was alone. However, I continued keeping my voice low and dangerous. If you hand it over to me right now, voluntarily, I might tell the officers that we recovered the item before their arrival. I might let you walk out of here with just a grand larceny charge instead of possession. I wiggled my fingers. The choice is yours. But you have about 60 seconds before the sirens get loud. Tiffany didn't hesitate. Her loyalty to Brad, her arrogance, her desire to be a socialite. It all vanished in the face of real consequences. Her hands shook violently as she reached behind her neck. She fumbled with the clasp. She broke a fingernail trying to undo the latch I had designed. Here she sobbed, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. Take it. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. The heavy platinum chain came loose. The sapphire caught the light of the spotlight one last time as it fell from her neck. She dropped it into my hand. It felt cold and heavy. It felt like justice. I closed my fingers around the stone. I didn't say thank you. You don't thank a thief for returning what is yours. I slipped the necklace into my pocket. Now take off the shawl, I said. Tiffany blinked. What? The shawl. I repeated. The cashmere wrap you are wearing. That is mine too. It went missing the same week as the necklace. Tiffany frantically unwrapped the shawl from her shoulders and thrust it at me. She was shivering now, exposed in her cheap dress, stripped of the borrowed luxury she had used to shield herself. I took the shawl and draped it over my arm, covering the wine stain on my suit. I looked at the four of them. Homeless, bankrupt, disbarred, and stripped. I turned to Henri. Henri, I said. The police are pulling up out front. I can see the lights flashing through the window. I looked back at my ex-husband. Brad, I said. Do you remember when you told me I was useless? Do you remember when you said I needed you to survive? He looked at me with hollow, dead eyes. I survived, Brad, I whispered. The question is, can you? I turned to the security guards. Escort them to the police vehicles, and make sure they don't take any silverware on the way out. The sirens arrived first. A piercing rhythmic wail that cut through the heavy silence of the dining room, growing louder with every second, until it felt like the sound was vibrating inside my own chest. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the street was bathed in a chaotic wash of red and blue light. The flashing strobes reflected off the crystal chandeliers, turning the elegant interior of the Obsidian into something that looked like a crime scene. I stood near the bar, my arms crossed over my ruined Dior jacket, watching the finale I had orchestrated. The heavy oak doors swung open, but this time it wasn't a guest. It was the New York Police Department. 4 officers in uniform walked in, their hands resting near their belts, their expressions serious and scanning. They didn't look at the decor. They didn't care about the Michelin stars. They were looking for the perpetrators of a felony in progress. Henri met them at the entrance. He spoke quietly to the lead officer, a tall sergeant with graying hair. He pointed toward table 1. The sergeant nodded and walked straight toward the Vances. The heavy thud of his boots on the marble floor was the only sound in the room. Bradley Vance, the sergeant said, his voice booming. Brad looked up. He was pale, his skin the color of old dough. He tried to stand, but his legs seemed to fail him, so he gripped the edge of the table. That is me, Brad stammered. But officer, there has been a misunderstanding. My ex-wife, she is the owner here, and she is having a mental breakdown. She is confused about the bill. We were just leaving. I watched Brad try to spin his last lie. It was pathetic. He was still trying to use his charm, unaware that his charm was a currency that had no value here. The sergeant didn't smile. He didn't look at me. He looked at the device in his hand. We received a flag from the fraud division regarding a transaction attempted on a corporate account, reported as compromised, the sergeant said. The amount was $48,000. Do you have the card ending in 8842 in your possession? Brad instinctively reached for his pocket, then stopped. He realized that producing the card was an admission of guilt. I have a card, Brad said, sweat dripping down his temple. But it is authorized. My mother bought this dinner. The sergeant looked at Victoria. Ma'am, did you pay for this meal? Victoria looked at the officer, then at Brad. She saw the handcuffs hanging from the sergeant's belt. Self-preservation kicked in instantly. Me, Victoria shrieked. I don't have that kind of money. I told him it was too expensive. I told him we shouldn't be here. He said he was treating us. He said he was the vice president. I have nothing to do with this. Brad turned to his mother, betrayal etched all over his face. Mom, you told me to order the wine. Victoria looked away. I did no such thing. The sergeant turned back to Brad. Step away from the table, sir. Put your hands behind your back. Brad froze. Wait, you can't arrest me. I am a white-collar professional. I have a job. Not anymore, I whispered from the shadows. The sergeant didn't have time for a debate. He grabbed Brad's wrist and spun him around. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was sharp and mechanical. Click, click. Brad let out a sob. It was a small, broken sound. Please. Everyone is watching. You are under arrest for grand larceny in the 2nd degree and credit card fraud, the sergeant recited. You have the right to remain silent. Marcus stood up then. He buttoned his jacket, trying to summon the ghost of his legal authority. Officer, I am Marcus King, attorney at law, he announced, stepping forward. I represent Mr. Vance. You are making a grave error. This is a civil dispute between spouses, not a criminal matter. Unhand my client immediately, or I will have your badge number." The sergeant looked at Marcus. Then he looked at the second officer. "Are you Marcus King?" the second officer asked, consulting a notepad. "I am," Marcus said, lifting his chin. "And I demand professional courtesy." The officer shook his head. "We received a digital packet from the State Bar Ethics Committee about 20 minutes ago. It included audio evidence of you conspiring to conceal assets and intimidating a witness. We have also been instructed to detain you pending an investigation into the forgery of a federal court order." Marcus's mouth fell open. The blood drained from his face so fast he looked like he might faint. That recording was illegal," Marcus whispered. "Tell it to the judge," the officer said. He spun Marcus around. Marcus didn't fight. He went limp. The man who bragged about weaponizing the law was now being crushed by it. He was handcuffed right next to his brother-in-law. Two men in expensive suits, bound by steel, standing in the middle of a dinner they couldn't pay for. Tiffany was already crying silently, holding her hands out for the officer before he even asked. She knew the drill. She surrendered without a word, terrified that I would change my mind about the stolen necklace charge if she made a scene. That left Victoria. She was sitting alone at the table. Her son was in cuffs. Her son-in-law was in cuffs. Her future daughter-in-law was in cuffs. She looked around the room. The diners were filming with their phones. The staff was watching with grim satisfaction. There was no exit. There was no one to blame. She did the only thing she knew how to do. She decided to play the victim one last time. She put a hand to her forehead. She let out a loud theatrical gasp. "Oh, my heart," she moaned, looking directly at the sergeant to make sure he was watching. I can't breathe. The stress. You are killing me." She wobbled in her chair, then slowly, dramatically slid sideways. She didn't fall hard. She controlled the descent, making sure she landed on the thick carpet and not the marble floor. She lay there, eyes fluttered shut, hand draped over her face, like a tragic heroine in an opera. Mom Brad screamed, struggling against the officer holding him. "Help her! She is having a heart attack!" The sergeant looked concerned. He reached for his radio. "Dispatch, we might need a bus at this location for an elderly female." I stepped forward. "Don't bother, Sergeant," I said, my voice cutting through the panic. The sergeant looked at me. "Ma'am." "She is acting," I said. "I have known this woman for 3 years. She faints every time the bill comes. She fainted at my wedding when the caterer asked for the final deposit. She fainted at Christmas when I asked her to help with the dishes." I walked over to where Victoria was lying on the floor. I stood directly over her. "Victoria," I said loud enough for the room to hear, "the paramedics are going to charge $2,000 for the ambulance ride. And since your son just admitted he is broke, and I am certainly not paying for it, that bill goes to you." Victoria's eyelid twitched. I continued, "And of course the hospital will have to cut that sequined dress off you to attach the EKG leads. It is a shame. I know how much you love that dress." Victoria's eyes snapped open. She sat up instantly, miraculous, healed by the threat of financial liability. "You are a monster," she hissed at me, scrambling to get her feet under her. I smiled. "No, Victoria, I am just the owner, and I don't allow loitering on the floor." I looked at the sergeant. "She is fine. Please remove them. They are disturbing my paying customers." The sergeant nodded, hiding a smirk. He gestured to his officers. "Let's go, folks. Party is over." The procession began. It was a long walk from table 1 to the front door. Brad went first, his head hung low, weeping openly now. The man who wanted to take my house and my dog was being led out like a common criminal. Marcus went next, staring straight ahead, his mind likely racing through the legal defenses he would never get to use because his license was already burning. Tiffany followed, shivering in her cheap dress, without the shawl to cover her. And finally, 2 officers grabbed Victoria by the arms. She tried to dig her heels into the carpet. She tried to scream about her rights, but they didn't listen. They dragged her feet sliding across the floor, her dignity left behind in a pile near the caviar tins. I watched them go. I watched them pass through the heavy oak doors. I saw the flashing lights paint their faces in blue and red one last time. And then the doors swung shut. The silence returned to the Obsidian. I looked around the room. The other diners were looking at me. They weren't judging me anymore. They were looking at me with awe. I adjusted my ruined jacket. I turned to Henri. "Henri," I said. "Yes." Madame President, apologize to the guests for the disruption. Comp everyone's dessert and send a bottle of Dom Perignon to every table. Put it on my personal tab. I looked at the empty table 1. And Henri. Yes, ma'am. Burn that tablecloth. I don't want a single trace of them left in my building. 48 hours after the doors of the Obsidian closed on the Vance family, I sat in my office at the Aura Group headquarters. The room was quiet. The city of New York sprawled out beneath me, a grid of steel and ambition. On my desk, 3 monitors displayed the comprehensive dismantling of the people who had tried to erase me. It was not a chaotic destruction. It was a systematic legal and financial deconstruction of their lives, documented in real time by the very society they tried so hard to impress. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel sadness. I felt the cold satisfaction of an accountant balancing a ledger. They had accrued a debt of disrespect and fraud, and now the universe was collecting the payment. I looked at the center screen. It displayed a press release from the New York State Bar Association. The headline was stark and unforgiving. Partner at King and Sterling suspended indefinitely pending investigation into witness intimidation and fraud. Marcus King. The man who had threatened to ruin me with a template he downloaded from the internet had become the most toxic asset in the legal world. The audio recording I sent had gone viral within hours. It wasn't just the ethics committee that heard it. It was his clients. It was his partners. It was the entire legal community. I opened an email from a contact at his firm. It was a short message. He was escorted out of the building by security this morning. The partners voted unanimously to strip him of his equity to protect the firm's reputation. He is facing disbarment and a potential 5-year prison sentence for the forged court order. I closed the email. Marcus had spent his life building a fortress of words. I had destroyed it with a single click. He wasn't a shark anymore. He was bait. I turned my attention to the left monitor. It showed a live feed from a local news station covering community service arrangements. And there he was, my husband, Bradley Vance, the vice president of operations, the man who wore $5,000 suits and drank $12,000 wine. He was wearing an orange high-visibility vest over a stained t-shirt. He was holding a trash picker and a plastic bag. He wasn't in a boardroom. He was on the side of the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway, fulfilling the terms of his immediate bail release while he awaited trial for credit card fraud. The company he worked for, a logistics firm that prided itself on integrity, had fired him via text message while he was being processed at the precinct. They cited a violation of the morals clause in his contract. His corporate phone was deactivated, his access badge was revoked. The lease on the Tesla had been terminated by my company, and the vehicle had been remotely locked and towed from the police station parking lot. I watched him stab a piece of litter with his stick. He looked broken. He looked small. Without my money to prop him up, without his mother's lies to inflate his ego, he was just a man picking up trash on the side of a highway. He had wanted to be a king. Now he was a janitor. But the most tragic, and perhaps the most fitting downfall, was playing out on the third monitor. Victoria Vance. With the penthouse sealed by the bank and her assets frozen due to the investigation into her complicity in the fraud, Victoria had nowhere to go. Her bridge club friends, the elite circle she worshipped, had ghosted her the moment the news broke. No one wanted to be associated with a woman whose family was arrested for grand larceny. She had checked into a budget motel in Queens. I knew this because I was currently watching her live stream on social media. The background was a peeling beige wall. The lighting was harsh and unflattering. Victoria was wearing the same sequined dress she had worn to the dinner, now wrinkled and smelling of stale perfume. She was holding up a handbag. It was a Chanel flat bag, or at least she claimed it was. "Please," she begged the camera, her voice cracking. "This is a vintage piece. It is worth $6,000. I am letting it go for $500. I just need cash for legal fees. It is a steal." I watched the comments roll in. The internet is a cruel place and it smells blood in the water. One user wrote that bag is fake. The stitching is wrong. Another commented, "Aren't you the lady who got kicked out of the Obsidian? Pay your bill, LOL." A third user posted a screenshot of the authentic bag next to hers, circling the obvious differences. Scammer. That is a Canal Street knockoff. Just like your life." Victoria was trying to delete the comments, her hands shaking, but they were coming too fast. She was trying to sell her fake luxury to pay for her real crimes, and nobody was buying it. She had spent her entire life pretending to be wealthy, looking down on people she considered beneath her. Now she was begging strangers on the internet for $500, exposing her fraud to the world. I watched for another minute. Then I saw her break. She threw the bag at the camera, screaming at the commenters, her face twisted in ugly, desperate rage. The feed cut to black. I leaned back in my chair. Marcus was disbarred. Brad was destitute. Victoria was a public laughingstock. Tiffany was currently in Rikers Island, unable to make the $100,000 bail set by a judge who didn't look kindly on stealing heirlooms. They had tried to take my dignity. They had tried to take my home. They had tried to take my future. In the end, all they took was a very long fall from a very high pedestal. I closed the laptop. The ledger was balanced, but there was one final transaction to make, one final piece of business to conclude before I could close this chapter forever. I stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. My reflection stared back at me. I wasn't the victim of a tragedy. I was the architect of a new era. My assistant buzzes the intercom. "Ma'am, the meeting with the board of Moore Enterprises is ready. They are waiting for you in conference room A." I smiled. Moore Enterprises. Tiffany's family business. Her father, Charles Moore, had been implicated in an insider trading scandal earlier that week. The company stock had plummeted. They were desperate for a buyer. They were desperate for a liquidity event to save them from bankruptcy, and I was the only buyer with enough cash on hand to save them. I checked my appearance in the glass. Perfect. I walked out of my office. It was time to go shopping. The conference room was cold. Charles Moore sat at the head of the table looking like a man who hadn't slept in a week. His lawyers were nervous. They knew they had no leverage. They knew Moore Enterprises was bleeding money and that the SEC was circling like sharks. When I walked in, Charles didn't recognize me. He only knew me as the chairman of Aura Group, the mysterious investor who had offered a lifeline. "Thank you for meeting with us, Ms. Vance," Charles said, his voice trembling. "We appreciate your interest in our portfolio. We believe that despite recent setbacks, the underlying assets of Moore Real Estate are strong." I sat down. I didn't open the portfolio. I didn't look at the projections. "I know the assets are strong, Charles," I said, "especially the Hamptons estate and the commercial properties in Midtown." Charles nodded eagerly. "Yes, exactly. We are looking for a strategic partner to help us weather this storm." "I am not looking for a partnership." "Charles," I said. I slid a single piece of paper across the mahogany table. "I am looking for an acquisition." Charles picked up the paper. He read the number. His eyes widened. This is a buyout offer," he stammered, "for 100% of the company. But the price, it is aggressive. It is barely above our debt obligations. It is a fair price for a sinking ship," I said, "and it is a cash offer. No financing contingencies. I can wire the funds this afternoon. You can pay your legal fees, you can pay your fines, and you can retire." Charles looked at his lawyers. They nodded. They knew it was the only way out. "But there is one condition," I added. "What is it?" Charles asked. "I want the name changed immediately. The Moore name is toxic. It will be rebranded under the Aura umbrella by tomorrow morning. And I want the board dissolved. I will be appointing my own directors." Charles slumped in his chair. He looked defeated. He looked like a man handing over his legacy. "You are taking everything," he whispered. "I am buying what is for sale." Charles I corrected him. "Just like your daughter tried to take what she thought was free." He looked up sharply. "My daughter Tiffany. Do you know her?" I smiled. "We met recently," I said. "She has excellent taste in jewelry. Unfortunately, she has terrible taste in men." Charles didn't understand. He didn't need to. He just needed to sign. He picked up the pen. He signed the deed to his empire over to the woman his daughter had mocked for wearing a suit. It was done. I walked out of the conference room 10 minutes later, the owner of a new real estate conglomerate. I took the private elevator up to the roof. The wind was strong this high up. The sun was setting over the Hudson River, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and gold. Henri was waiting for me. He had set up a small table near the edge of the parapet. On the table was a bottle of wine. It was a Chateau Margaux 2009, the same vintage Victoria had ordered, the same vintage Brad had toasted with. Henri poured a glass. The dark red liquid swirled against the crystal. "To the new acquisition," Madame Henri asked. I picked up the glass. I looked at the city below. I saw the lights coming on in the skyscrapers. Somewhere down there in the dark corners of the city, my ex-husband was sitting in a holding cell. Somewhere down there, my mother-in-law was sleeping on a lumpy mattress. Somewhere down there, the people who had underestimated me were learning the hard way that gravity is unforgiving. "No, Henri," I said, "not to the acquisition." I took a sip. The wine was rich, complex, and tasted like absolute victory. "To the receipts," I said. I drank the wine. It was the most expensive glass I had ever had, not because of the price tag, but because of what it cost to get here. It cost me my innocence. It cost me my trust. But in return, it bought me my freedom. I looked directly into the camera lens, breaking the fourth wall for the first time. They told me I was lucky to be included. They told me I was a burden. They told me I should be grateful for the scraps from their table. They were wrong. I wasn't the burden. I was the foundation. And when I walked away, the whole house collapsed. So here is the lesson. Don't let anyone appraise your value. Don't let anyone tell you that you are lucky to be in the room. If they don't respect you, don't argue with them. Don't fight them. Don't cry over them. Just wait. Keep the receipts. Build your own empire in the silence. And when the time is right, don't just leave the table. Buy the restaurant. Because the best revenge isn't making them suffer. The best revenge is living a life so expensive, so exclusive, and so powerful that they can't even afford to watch. I am Chloe Vance, and this is my receipt. If you enjoyed seeing the Vances get exactly what they deserved, hit that like button right now. Let me know in the comments what is the pettiest thing you have ever done to a toxic family member. I read every single one. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. You don't want to miss the next story. Trust me, the next receipts are even longer.